Chapter 522. Dead? When Hun's mature face was suddenly full of shock. He widened his eyes. Perhaps the respect of the stone lion gave him great courage. He finally asked the answer he had always wanted to know: you ghosts will also die. Ghosts don't belong to the 5 elements and don't enter reincarnation, but they will also die. Just like weak ghosts like us, if we don't have a powerful backer to protect us, we'll be devoured by even more powerful ghosts not long after we gain consciousness. When Hun was surprised and continued to ask, what kind of ghost can be regarded as a backer? Of course, it's the red-clothed senior. But you just said that the red-clothed senior are all dead. That is the ghost that is more powerful than the red-clothed senior. Even those lords can only be reduced to food. As he said, the stone lion secretly peeped at Suli. Seeing that Suli didn't respond, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. If it could sweat, its body would have been soaked with cold sweat at this moment. When Hun heard this, he suddenly felt a sense of horror. The ghost that was more powerful than the ferocious ghost in red. Did it refer to the immortal of ghost worshipped by the master? The master went for the immortal of ghost this time. Now the immortal of ghost wreaked havoc in the sect. What did it mean? Would the master come back after a month? When Hun was shocked, and his face changed. Suli was a little helpless. What was this silly boy imagining again? Well, I will keep the 3rd floor of the book pavilion first. I will find out the relationship between the book pavilion and the deep mountain first, and then make a plan. It happens that there is one difficult to digest among the red-clothed senior. During the day, Suli followed Wen Hun to guard the hole. She was warned by Wen Hun not to leave the yard at night. After dinner, Wen Hun left in the dusk. When it was completely dark, Suli closed the door of the yard and returned to the addendum. Crack! The shadow shuddered and a drenched red-clothed girl was flung out. The red-clothed girl struggled on the ground for a moment before she managed to sit up. On her pale face, tears of blood flowed from her pitch-black, pupilless eyes, down her neck and body. Soon, a pool of blood was formed on the ground. Suli faced her. Against the candlelight, the atmosphere gradually became gloomy and horrible. Don't dirty my addendum. Suli suddenly said softly and broke the silence. The red-clothed girl was stunned for a moment, and then her tears of blood flowed even faster. However, when they reached her feet, the girl sucked them back with great effort. The pool of blood on the ground also gradually shrank and disappeared. Good girl. Suli smiled gently and held the little face of the porcelain doll in her hands. The girl in red suddenly trembled more violently. What's your name? The red-clothed girl opened her blood-red mouth and spoke carefully. Her voice seemed to come from countless men and women, chaotic and sharp. This kind of eerie voice should have made people feel fear, but at this moment, the voice revealed a strong sense of begging for mercy. I am Hong Baizhu. Don't eat me. Suli smiled slightly and let go of her palm. She said in a casual tone, it depends on whether you are obedient or not. Your companions are so ugly that I can't help but want to destroy them. But you are different. Although your eyes are not very good, your face is very beautiful. The red-dressed girl blushed and touched her face. Feeling somewhat embarrassed, she stammered, Is that so? Those are not my companions, and they always compete with me for food. Suli's eyes narrowed slightly, and her tone was still gentle. How many people have you eaten? The dark eyes of the red-dressed girl were full of confusion. What are people? Suli chuckled and pointed outside, those living creatures outside who can move and go back to your place to read during the day. The red-dressed girl suddenly understood and immediately shook her head. She touched her dry belly, and a trace of curiosity appeared in her dark eyes. I haven't eaten them. Are they delicious? You haven't eaten them. Su Li's first thought was that she was lying, and her eyes were slightly cold. The red-dressed girl suddenly panicked and hurriedly explained while stammering, "Really haven't eaten them. I just woke up. They always lie to me. I have been cheated several times." Su Li looked at the red-dressed girl thoughtfully, as if she was thinking about the authenticity of this sentence. The red-dressed girl was extremely scared and continued to stammer, I am different from them. They all eat too much, and become like me. I was born. I slept for a long time, and when I woke up, I couldn't defeat them." She seldom spoke and spoke intermittently, but Su Li still understood her. "Are you nobler than them?" Su Li slightly raised her lips and touched the soft black hair of the red-dressed girl. The girl was scared and wanted to cover her head, but she failed. "You slept for a long time, so it seems that you don't know the origin of the immortal cultivation sect. I didn't expect that the one who is the most difficult to digest is the most useless." As soon as the words came out, more bloody tears appeared in the eyes of the red-dressed girl. They almost overflowed her eyes and flowed down her cheeks. "I'm so scared. I don't want to be eaten. I don't feel good sleeping." The strong sense of fear stimulated the black eyes of the red-dressed girl to burst out a little white light. Then it seemed that she was suddenly enlightened, and the memory before she fell asleep flashed back for a moment. Although it was only for a moment, it was enough for the red-dressed girl to remember a lot. The red-dressed girl froze for a moment and suddenly became happy. I know. She knew that she didn't need to sleep. The red-dressed girl's idea was too simple. Before Su Li continued to ask questions, she impatiently stretched out her fleshy and bloodless cold little hand and pointed at the center of Su Li's eyebrows. She shared her poor memory with Su Li. In an instant, a clear picture flashed through Su Li's awareness. See. Under the dark sky, the familiar mountaintop of the immortal cultivation sect came into view. However, there were too many disciples of the immortal cultivation sect. There were tens of thousands of them. There were dense pavilions in the mountain range, and even the area in the deep mountain was included in it. How many years ago is this picture? Su Li's heart skipped a beat, and the picture in her mind accelerated. Soon, she saw a figure like Hong Baizhu standing in the air, and the human clan of the immortal cultivation sect were all shivering under her feet. The woman was slim and beautiful. 2 lines of symbolic bloody tears were dotted under her eyelids, like 2 rubies, which made her more enchanting. Is this the former Hong Baizhu? Su Li was surprised. The scene in front of Hong Baizhu in her memory was revealed. There were 2 ghosts like mountains of flesh. The pale flesh all over their body was like rocks, which were squeezed together in an extremely chaotic manner. The word ugly was not enough to describe the appearance of the 2 ghosts. Ha ha ha, Hong Baizhu, you are a ghost lord, but you can't even control your subordinates. Today, we will accept your in-gathering place. A hoarse, crazy, and childish voice came from the mountain of flesh on the left, which made Su Li couldn't help but pick her ears. Was the voice of the ghost cut into pieces by the natural law? It was very unpleasant to hear. In contrast, the voice of Hong Baizhu could be regarded as the sound of nature. In the picture, Hong Baizhu's pretty face was full of anger. She snorted softly, and the familiar voice without childishness sounded, "Even if I am alone, I will not be bullied by a group of trash like you. Get out of here." After saying that, she stretched out her hand and grasped with her 5 fingers. A blood-red umbrella appeared in her palm out of thin air. The top of the umbrella floated, and 2 huge red cold lights flew out. The 2 mountains of flesh laughed strangely at the same time, and raised a flesh shield that was constantly screaming. The 2 cold lights flew over and directly sank into the flesh shield. Then the flesh shield's scream became louder. When Hong Baizhu saw this shield, her pupils suddenly shrank. The wall of evil ghosts is actually here. Aren't you afraid of the Ghost Emperor's blame? Ha ha ha, the Ghost Emperor. He can't even protect himself now. After eating you, I will be the master here. The two mountains of flesh laughed wildly. Suddenly, they wriggled and merged together. The huge shield instantly extended countless times, including the entire immortal cultivation sect. The body of the descendant of the Ghost Emperor, I really can't wait, ha 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 ha. Hong Baizhu looked cold and solemn. She was in a desperate situation, but she didn't panic. Instead, she showed a determined look. 2 blood tears fell down from her eyelids, and the blood tears that had stopped flowing immediately flowed down. Even if I fall into an endless sleep, I will never let you succeed. Then, the picture turned into a white light, and then dimmed down. Hong Baizhu, who looked like a little girl, had her eyes shining. It turned out that she was so powerful before, but now she was going to be eaten. As she thought about it, more blood tears flowed down, and then she hurriedly sucked back all the blood on the ground. Although she was still Hong Baizhu, her consciousness was reborn. Although fragments of memory flashed back occasionally, they couldn't replace her current consciousness. Black Lotus, when are you able to see through this memory? Su Li transmitted her thoughts into Black Lotus Ring. Tut tut, in the era of ghosts, there was even the Ghost Emperor. In addition, it is not difficult to guess that it is the All Spirits era, which is even older than Kuei-Yu Palace in terms of history. It seems that sometimes rumors can be believed. The immortal cultivation sect has existed for at least tens of thousands of years, or even longer. After all, the history of the All Spirits era is so long that no one knows how long that era lasted. Su Li looked at Hong Baizhu, who was still crying, and felt a little strange. In other words, she almost ate an old monster who lived in the All Spirits era. Fortunately, this Hong Baizhu seems to be the descendant of the Ghost Emperor, and it is difficult for me to digest her. Otherwise, it will be a big loss. Su Li thought, and suddenly pointed to the direction of the deep mountain outside the house. Sense it. How is the strongest existence inside compared to you in your heyday? Suddenly asked, Hong Baizhu forgot to cry, and began to sense the same kind instinctively in a daze. Her bloodline was unusual, and she soon got the result. It is very strange, very weak, and I don't know it. Now I am weaker than that thing. I can't defeat it. Su Li nodded gently. In this way, with the memory of Hong Baizhu, she finally got some ideas. After sleeping for so many years, you lost your memory, and your nest was occupied by some unknown little ghost. Su Li's eyes were shining, and she gently touched Hong Baizhu's smooth and soft hair. Inexplicably, I picked up a treasure. Is it because of my identity as the daughter of luck? Chapter 523. 34 Chinese Language Network, wonderful pop-up window free reading. Su Li's doubts. No one could tell her the answer. She didn't dwell on it and continued to ask, what is the Yin gathering place used for? Hong Baizhu tilted her head and recalled for a while. She pointed to the door and said, I feed them and protect their Yin energy. I eat enough. Su Li nodded and whispered, so, in your time, the human clan and you depended on each other and were food for each other. Time. Hong Baizhu's eyes were full of confusion. She couldn't understand many words that Su Li said, but she could instinctively feel that the existence in front of her was very disgusted with eating people. So, she continued, those weak ones, as long as they are alive, have Yin energy. I don't eat them. Su Li smiled slightly. The smile was so gentle that the little girl was a little dazzled. I don't dislike you eating people, as long as you don't eat innocent people. There are many cultivators in the cultivation world who seek death. I have yet to see a cultivator who doesn't deserve to die. Hong Baizhu was stunned, then, you've, Suli squinted and said softly. I also deserve to die, but I am not reconciled, so. I can't die. The little girl didn't understand. She sat aside and tried to keep the blood and tears from staining the ground. She was silent. Suli took out a piece of palm-sized flesh. The little girl sniffed it and suddenly opened her eyes. She looked up at Suli's palm. Her eyes seemed to be shining. She said instinctively, Insi, flesh and blood. What is Insi? The little girl was stunned again. Her little face wrinkled and she was distressed. Insi, what is Insi? She didn't remember. She only knew it was a good thing. Suli no longer forced her. Tsang Lei's cave was a practitioner's cave. It couldn't trap her, so she put it into Black Lotus Ring and dealt with it later. It's better to see it with my own eyes. Suli pushed the door open. The glimmer of the morning shone through the window with a rare warmth. But I can't destroy the seal outside the deep mountain rashly. Otherwise, the vibration alone will destroy the entire immortal cultivation sect. Suli didn't think of a good way for a while. Junior sister apprentice. At this moment, Wen Hun's shout came from outside. Suli immediately restrained the expression on her face and went out. As usual, Suli and Wen Hun sat in front of the steps of the hall. Maybe it was because of swallowing too many ghosts, the perception of evil ghost was much clearer than before. If Suli, who could not see anything before, transferred her consciousness to evil ghost, she could see the dark veins crisscrossing like blood vessels in the depths of the hole. All the veins were concentrated in a huge shadow directly below the hole. It looked like a heart, in which the pure black yin qi flowed slowly and beat very slowly. If you did not sense it carefully, you would think it was dead. A living heart. Is this what the immortal cultivation sect guards? She tilted her head and glanced at Wen Hun, who was in a trance. On that day, the bloody snake made trouble. The silly boy's first thought was to take me to the palace. That is to say, the thing under the ground is opposite to the thing in the deep mountain. But it seems that the silly boy is not willing to trigger the existence under the ground unless it is a last resort. Thinking of this, Suli calmed down and continued to concentrate on memorizing the looming seal of the boundary between the deep mountain and the sect. After a few more days of observation, she could be familiar with the tactical matrix. Although she could not unlock it, she could go into the deep mountain without disturbing the seal. It happens that my soul power will be accumulated to the limit in a few days, and my realm will be on the verge of breaking through. If there is no accident, there will be thunder for punishment. I have to find a secluded place to release Su Bai and let him have a good meal. Suli was quiet and no longer asked questions. Wen Hun only thought that she finally began to believe his words, so he did not disturb her and left enough time for her. In such a quiet and harmonious daily life, another 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. In a week's time, Master will be back. Wen Hun sat beside the steps with a gray spiritual saber beside him. In these days, some little ghosts came to harass him, but they were all beheaded by him neatly. However, in the eyes of the little junior sister apprentice, he was probably like a psychopath who slashed at the air. Wen Hun sighed secretly and turned to look at Suli, who preferred to be in a daze rather than talking. He immediately felt that he had guessed the point. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly felt something and turned his head to look at the transparent seal wall deep in the mountain. He happened to see a familiar brown-robed old man flying over and landing in front of him with a kind smile on his face. Master! Wen Hun was overjoyed. He quickly stood up and said excitedly, "You finally come back." The sect. Ho ho, He-Jiu came close and patted Wen Hun's thin shoulder. Well done. I know what happened in the sect these days. It's a natural disorder. It's not your fault. Wen Hun was relieved and nodded gently. Then he felt strange. Didn't the master never believe in heaven? He only believed in, immortal of ghosts. However, he didn't think too much, and asked with a smile, didn't you say it would take a month? Why in advance? I'll come back when I finish my business. Hee-jio interrupted Wen Hun and waved his hand. Then he seemed to feel something and shifted his sight to Suli, who had been staring at him. At this moment, Hee-jio had an illusion that he was seen through. His face was distorted for a moment, and then returned to normal. He said solemnly, Wen Hun, why is this girl here? Wen Hun remembered that the master asked him to guard the hall alone. At this moment, he was caught red-handed by the master. He panicked and hurriedly stood in front of Suli. Master, it's my fault. I'm too lonely and bored, so I asked junior sister apprentice to accompany me. You can blame me if you want to blame someone. Hee-jio snorted with a cold face, forget it. You too, follow me into the hall. He turned around and stepped up the steps. Wen Hun smiled bitterly and was about to pull Suli to follow him. But he pulled Suli to an empty space. Wait a minute. A clear voice came. Wen Hun looked up in amazement but found that Suli actually stood in front of Hee-jio. When did the junior sister apprentice go there? Hee-jio frowned and looked a little angry. Su-yu, do you know what you are doing? Wen Hun was a little confused, and more uneasy. He stepped forward and pulled Suli's arm. Junior sister apprentice, what are you doing? Why do you block the master's way? Suli smiled and motioned Wen Hun not to panic. Then she looked back and smiled lightly. If you are really the master, as an apprentice, I can't block the way. But you are just a ghost. Do you deserve it? Wen Hun suddenly trembled all over, and stared at Hee-jio's angry face in surprise and doubt. But he was the master. If Suli was a ghost, how could he not see it as a half-human and half-ghost? Besides, the junior sister apprentice didn't practice ghost chapter, so she couldn't see the ghost at all. Why, ho, I see. Hee-jio was silent for a moment, and suddenly sneered. I was wondering why the sect became so chaotic after I left for only 1 month. It turns out that you, the insidious maid, are playing tricks in the dark. The means of the Ni sect are really powerful. They almost made the immortal cultivation sect fall apart. As he said, he looked at Wen Hun, whose face changed constantly. Disciple, come here. What have I taught you? No matter what happens, don't panic. Is our relationship as master and disciple less than that of a maid? Wen Hun looked at Suli, who seemed to be a different person. His heart ached, but he still struggled and asked, Junior sister apprentice, is what the master said true? Suli narrowed her eyes slightly, and her pupils turned into the pure black like that of the evil ghost. At that moment, Hee-jio was a mass of rotting flesh that kept howling. However, there was a layer of strange colorful light on the surface of the rotting flesh, which blinded Wen Hun's sight. Senior fellow apprentice, she suddenly said and looked at Wen Hun seriously, have I hurt you in the past half a month? Wen Hun was stunned, and his heart began to waver again. Although he said that the master only took a fancy to his talent and cultivated him carefully, it was not easy to give up the kindness of raising him up. But the junior sister apprentice brought him indescribable warmth and happiness in the short period of less than 2 months. For the first time, he felt that he was still alive, and still like a living person. Wen Hun choked. He didn't want to give up anyone. Suli didn't say anything more. At this moment, the black veins under her feet were constantly surging, sending her a hint of extreme danger. Although she didn't understand, if the mass of rotting flesh in front of her entered the palace, something that would make her unhappy would definitely happen. She still wanted to control the other 25 sects through the immortal cultivation sect. It couldn't be destroyed like this. The massive veins did not prompt her at the beginning, but flowed to Wenhun. But Wenhun's soul was shielded, so he couldn't perceive it. Those black veins stagnated for a moment, and then turned to her. That kind of sluggish movement gave her the feeling that he was anxious to find someone to try his luck in a desperate situation. It was like he was trying everything he could to make a desperate gamble. That massive shadow has its own consciousness. Su was still thinking, but the mass of rotting flesh couldn't wait any longer. He said patiently, "Disciple, think about your duties. If you are so indecisive, how can you continue to be my personal disciple? How can you become the future lord of the immortal cultivation sect?" As soon as the words came out, Wenhun stopped trembling. He raised his head. At this moment, his panicked heart seemed to be injected with a dose of cardiotonic. He-Jiu smiled. Then when he saw Wenhun standing beside Su, he froze completely. Wenhun showed a relieved smile on his bloodless face. "Damned ghost, how could a blockhead like you possibly understand the relationship between Master and me?" On the first day when he became the personal disciple of He-Jiu, he was warned by the old man. "You only have 200 years. After 200 years, you will enter the deep mountain and continue to fight for our sect. So, if you are willing to be my personal disciple, you have no fate with the Lord. Are you willing?" "I am willing to fight for the sect." Chapter 524. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. Wenhun stood beside Su, and the gray saber appeared in his hand out of thin air. He stared at He-Jiu coldly. He-Jiu's face was rigid, like a robot that was suddenly stuck. Then, his eyeballs rolled crazily inside his eye sockets like marbles. His entire face began to shake, and pieces of human skin were shaken off like powder, revealing the layers of rotten flesh underneath. Ew! It was the first time for Wenhun to see such a disgusting ghost. He couldn't help but retch and almost spit out the breakfast. But at this moment, he heard the clear voice of his junior sister apprentice, senior fellow apprentice, "Step back." He took a step back subconsciously, and immediately saw a barbed hook and sickle passing the tip of his nose. He was so scared that he broke into a cold sweat. If he didn't step back, half of his face would be cut off just now. But before he recovered from the shock, the rotten flesh suddenly swelled rapidly, burst his clothes, and turned into a mass of white flesh. In the middle of the flesh, there was a huge mouth full of sharp teeth, which was opening and closing constantly. "Tut tut tut tut. You spoil my plan. I will swallow you." The flesh laughed wildly, and crushed Su and Wenhun. Wenhun's face changed dramatically, and he was about to step back. But a strong thought came from his feet, and impacted his awareness. Wenhun's pale face suddenly turned pale. The severe pain made him even unable to think, and instinctively covered his head. "No! No! Drive it away! Don't let it in. Otherwise, I will die, and you will all." The roar stopped abruptly, and the pain receded like a tide. Wenhun put down his hands, like a drowning person being lifted out of the water. He gasped violently, trying to relieve the tinnitus caused by the impact just now. He tried to open his eyes wide, and the blurred scene in front of him gradually became clear. He saw a pair of ink-black pupils, which were shedding bloody tears, occupied his whole sight. Ah! Wenhun was so scared that his heart stopped suddenly. He swung the gray saber to chop, but was caught by a small hand. "Well, don't scare him. He is more precious than you." Su Li's voice came. The small hand suddenly shrank, stepped back for 2 steps, and bowed to Wenhun carefully. Wenhun saw it clearly. It turned out to be a little girl who was younger than his junior sister apprentice. but the bloody tears in her eyes. Ghost? An obedient ghost. He was shocked, and everything that happened just now flashed in his mind quickly. Then, his sight couldn't help but pass Hong Baizhu and fall on Su Li. She still had that delicate and pretty face and that frail and delicate body. But now, the pitifully weak junior sister he knew had actually stepped on that huge mountain of flesh ghost and turned it into a thin sheet of paper. Was there really something wrong with the people from NI sect? Wen Hun bit his lips tightly. He only felt bitterness in his mouth and resentment in his heart, but couldn't tell anyone. He trusted someone so unreservedly, but it was actually a lie. Senior brother, now is not the time to be distracted. Since there is something in the deep mountains pretending to be master, that means, Wen Hun was shocked. As expected, he had no time to think about Su Li's identity. He held his forehead and walked to Su Li, and asked uncomfortably, Su Yu, what did you ask? Hearing the change of Wen Hun's address, Su Li raised her eyebrows, and then chuckled, I haven't been in this sect for a long time. I don't understand what he said. Senior brother apprentice, you can interrogate. You, don't call me senior brother. A trace of anger appeared on Wen Hun's pale face, and there was a childish grievance that couldn't be seen. Su Li couldn't help laughing. Although she couldn't empathize with Wen Hun's emotions with her state of mind, she still apologized with understanding, sorry, I concealed my identity, but I only concealed a name. The name is fake, but my heart is real. Do you care about me or my name? Wen Hun couldn't find the words to refute for a while. He felt that Su Li's words were a little weird, but after thinking carefully, he found it reasonable. What did he care about? Was it just a name? As the little junior sister apprentice said, in the past more than a month, she had never been hypocritical to him. Even today, thanks to the help of the junior sister apprentice, he was saved from being killed by the ghost. Forget it. I'm in the erosion period, and I won't live long. Don't worry about it. Thinking of this, he felt unwilling. But in the face of business, he managed to put away his emotions, took out a red jade token from his arms, and put it on the rotten meat. With a bang, the red jade token burned spontaneously, and a small area of rotten meat was scorched. The meat immediately struggled violently. Wen Hun's heart sank, and he said, it's really a ghost in the deep mountain. If it's a ghost in the book pavilion, it won't ignite the Yang token. So what should we do now? Su Li blinked, and asked for Wen Hun's opinion. Wen Hun hesitated for a moment, and said, I don't know what is in the deep mountain. If we can get the confession of this ghost, we may get something. It's easy. Su Li lifted her foot, reached out, and grabbed the rotten meat on the ground into a bowl. Then she threw it to the little ghost, Hong Baizhu. The little girl caught it with some disgust. But in order to prove her value, she still tried to investigate the rotten meat. Then she said in a ghost's unique voice, 10 minutes, unlock the memory. Then you stay here. Su Li set a bounded domain of ghost for the little girl, and then walked into the hall with Wen Hun. Where are we going? Wen Hun looked back at the little girl with bloody tears who was concentrating on cracking the memory, and couldn't help asking. Su Li smiled sweetly. Senior fellow apprentice was bullied by a bad guy just now. How can I forget it? As she said, she stopped smiling, and stamped her feet gently. The ripples spread, and her soft voice instantly became cold. Come out. The shadow penetrated into the ground, and turned into a sharp sword to cut off dozens of black meridians in an instant. The pure black gas gushing out from the broken meridians was absorbed by the evil ghost. The shadow in the deepest part was angry at once, and controlled the nearby black meridians to entangle the evil ghost. The hall shook violently, as if there was an earthquake. Wen Hun was horrified. He wanted to take Su Li away, but found that he couldn't move Suli at all, and the ground around Suli didn't shake at all. This fluctuation. Is it possible that Junior Sister Apprentice and the immortal ghost underground fight? When Hun thought of what Suli said just now, and was immediately stunned by his guess. At this moment, boom! Several holes were broken on the slate in the center of the hall, and dozens of black meridians shot out like tentacles. They paused in the air for a moment, and then turned into sharp swords uniformly, stabbing towards Suli like lightning. Junior Sister Apprentice, be careful. The speed of the meridians was so fast that Hun had no time to block them. At the moment when he spoke, those meridians had already arrived in front of Suli. Do you think I am the weakness? Suli narrowed her eyes, and stretched out her right hand calmly. The golden electric arc twined and flickered, and the power in her palm was released lightly. Swishing. A golden light as thick as a bucket burst out. Boom! Patter. When Hun's legs went soft, and he fell to the ground. He stared at the hall without roof and walls in shock. There was no trace of those meridians in front of him. The ground of the hall seemed to be plowed by someone. Except for the rolled soil, there was nothing left. Junior Sister Apprentice. What was her cultivation? Senior Fellow Apprentice, I accidentally damaged the Master's hall. Suli brushed her hair behind her ears in embarrassment, and her face was slightly red. When Hun came to his sense, he opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say for a moment. I don't want to, either. Suli shook her head and sighed, it's just that I have eaten too much recently. Even I don't know what realm my strength has reached, so I can't control it properly. When Hun was silent for a moment. When he was about to say something, he suddenly saw Suli look slightly serious. She looked behind him and said calmly, Senior Fellow Apprentice, come to me. When Hun felt a chill in his heart. He rushed to Suli without saying a word, and then he dared to look back. It was unknown when a black meridian as thick as a bucket sprang out of the broken ground, and turned into an indistinct twisted shadow. The shadow was colorful, almost containing all the colors in the world, but most of them were dirty gray at first glance. Your Excellency, is the Emperor in the human world. The familiar ghost voice sounded, but there was a strong fear in it. You and I mind our own business. Why do you destroy my small temple? Ho ho. Suli chuckled softly, and said indifferently, Who are you? Tell me your name. When Hun was a little confused. The ghost called the Junior Sister Apprentice Emperor. What did that mean? The Master was just in Huashan Realm. Above Huashan Realm was Nature's Test, which had nothing to do with the word Emperor. The twisted shadow didn't seem to hear the derogatory meaning in Suli's words, and then responded, I am a remnant of an ancient ghost, and the Ghost Emperor gave me the name Hong. Emperor of Human Clan, you are a rare overmatch of Human Clan. Why do you offend the Ghost Emperor for a gathering place? Ghost Emperor. Suli tilted her head and smiled, so, you live in the All-Spirits era. I heard that the Ghost Emperor only lives in the All-Spirits era. When the twisted shadow heard this, a cold sweat came down instantly. Speaking of the Ghost Emperor, it's a coincidence. Suli pointed outside the door, that little girl is called Hong Baizhu. Since you know the Ghost Emperor, do you know her? The twisted shadow trembled, and seemed to disperse. The atmosphere was stagnant at this moment. When Hun glanced at Suli, and then looked up at the immortal of ghost regarded as the Master by the Master. He couldn't help but scratch his head. What did the Junior Sister Apprentice say to the immortal of ghost? He didn't understand a word, but it seemed that the Junior Sister Apprentice had the upper hand. At this moment, footsteps came from outside the hall. It was the little girl who pinched a bit of minced meat in her hand, and said with joy in her chaotic voice, It's out. When the twisted shadow saw the bloody tears in the little girl's eyes, it suddenly collapsed. It was really the legendary Hong Baizhu. The little girl held the minced meat and was a little confused. But she still walked to Su Li and reached out to point between Su Li's eyebrows. That memory, pass, to. Puff. With a sudden sound in the hall, the collapsed shadow reappeared. Chapter 525. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. After the smoke dissipated, the distorted shadow was gone. Instead, it was replaced by a little black pig. It was just an ordinary little black pig, which was no different from the black pigs raised by farmers. When Wen Hun saw the thing on the ground, he felt a surge of blood and dizziness. He felt that he had been humiliated after practicing for hundreds of years. This is the immortal of ghost worshipped by the master. The little black pig on the ground stuck up its butt, walked slowly to Hong Baizhu, and knelt down like a human. "Your Highness." Before it finished speaking, it saw the little girl hiding behind Su Li in fear. Although she was also afraid of Su Li, at least Su Li would not eat her for the time being. And this black pig was the same kind as her. Since they were the same kind, they would eat each other. "This little girl doesn't remember you." Su Li reached out and took the little girl in her arms. Her tone was smooth but indisputable. "You don't have to salute. Both the immortal cultivation sect and you seem to be in a bad situation. I have nothing to do, so I am willing to help you. Now I ask and you answer. Do you hear me?" The little black pig nodded hurriedly. It couldn't be better that the emperor of the human clan in front of it was willing to help. As for the consequences, it would not be worse than being swallowed by the thing in the Yin Mountain. "Very well. Now I ask you, what is hidden in the deep mountain? Where did He Jiu go?" Seeing Wen Hun beside Su Li, the little black pig didn't dare to lie. "Since the Lihan tablet was set up, Qingshui's circle has been changed. It is no longer suitable for us to live. I have consumed too much energy and am about to die." Fortunately, Yinsi of the Yin Mountain transmitted the sound and was willing to help me with flesh and blood. But Yinsi was sealed in the depths of the Yin Mountain, and there was a tactical matrix set by the human clan outside the Yin Mountain. I couldn't get in. In desperation, I could only make an agreement with the immortal cultivation sect. They entered the mountain to help me get flesh and blood, and I gave them a little flesh and blood. But He Jiu must keep the secret and not let others find out my existence. Otherwise, I would be attacked by the human clan, and this sect would also be destroyed. He Jiu promised me and kept his promise to keep a low profile. The immortal cultivation sect and I depended on each other. At first, we lived in harmony, but later. The little black pig's eyes darkened. It's true that humans eat the flesh and blood of Yinsi to improve their souls, but, after all, humans and ghosts are different. After the excess of Yinsi's flesh and blood, many disciples of the immortal cultivation sect died suddenly, and new ghosts that can adapt to Qingshui's circle were born. Speaking of this, Su Li already had a guess in her heart, but she still didn't say anything and continued to listen to the little black pig. The newborn ghost was ferocious and forbearing. He possessed He Jiu's first disciple and sneaked into Yin Mountain, intending to devour Yinsi. However, Yinsi was not easy to deal with. Even in a weak state, he sealed him with one hand. Every 100 years, He Jiu would enter the mountain to perform a ritual to strengthen the seal. The new ghost hates me, Yinsi, and the sect. Every time the seal is consolidated, there will be some trouble in the sect, but it has never been more fierce than this time. I recognize the rotten flesh. It is the ability of the new ghost. If I am integrated with it, I will be delirious and do irreversible things. The little black pig trembled, and fear flashed in its eyes. If you didn't happen to come to this sect, I am afraid that not only the Immortal Cultivation sect but also the entire Jojo region will suffer a catastrophe. Suli waved her hand and looked indifferent. She said, "How did the ghost in the book pavilion appear? You said that you made an agreement with Hijou. Hijou is only more than 3,000 years old. There are even ghosts 4 or 5,000 years old in the book pavilion. Don't tell me that they are also born by the disciples of the Immortal Cultivation sect." The little black pig originally wanted to deceive her, but it didn't expect that Suli even knew the age of the ghosts in the book pavilion. It shook its head and told the truth. Of course not. The book pavilion is not a book pavilion, but built by imitating the Tsangyin Tower in ancient times. The ghosts hiding in it will not be affected by Qingshui Circle. There are also many precious scripts that only ghosts can practice in it. It was not open to the disciples of the Immortal Cultivation sect, but somehow it was opened later. Is that so? Suli nodded gently, and light flashed in her eyes. Why don't you hide in it? Why do you have to suffer underground? The little black pig's eyes flashed, and it looked bitter. It's not that I don't want to, but that my body is too big, and the fake Tsangyin Tower can't accommodate me at all. Suli nodded, and accepted the answer. She was silent for a moment, and asked aloud, "If I want to save the Immortal Cultivation sect, what should I do?" "Your Excellency, you are righteous." The little black pig was excited, and bent its 2 forelegs as if it was kneeling. "If the ghosts in the Yin Mountain can be destroyed, everything can be solved. Your Excellency, please help the Immortal Cultivation sect through the difficulties." Phew! Wen Hun breathed a sigh of relief. Hearing this, he finally understood the essence of the Immortal Cultivation sect, and couldn't help but look at Suli hopefully. Suli looked back and smiled at him. Then she turned around, and her face became indifferent again. "Don't worry. I won't leave it alone even for the sake of my senior fellow apprentice. You go back and have a rest first. I will go to the Yin Mountain in a few days." "Thank you, Your Excellency." The little black pig achieved its goal, so it didn't stay any longer. In the blink of an eye, its figure disappeared and returned to the depths of the ground. "Senior fellow apprentice, the new ghost wants to invade again, and it won't be so fast. This hall doesn't need to be protected for the time being. Let's go back to rest first, and then go to the Yin Mountain tomorrow." When Hun nodded, looked around, and couldn't help sighing when he saw the Hall of the Lord was almost destroyed. Then he stepped away. After going down the main peak, Wen Hun went to appease the disciples of the sect. After all, the movement on the main peak was not small, which had attracted many people to stop and watch. Suli returned to her residence, stood in front of her yard, and looked at the deep mountain from afar. "Little Suli, are you really going to the Yin Mountain to kill the ghosts tomorrow?" Black Lotus couldn't help but rush out, and asked with a strange look. In his impression, Suli was not a warm-hearted person. What, protect the Immortal Cultivation sect for senior fellow apprentice? What a lie. No, that black and swarthy little piglet was a ghost, wasn't it? I must go to the Yin Mountain. Suli chuckled. As for whether to kill the new ghost or not, she didn't say anything. Black Lotus rolled his eyes, and knew that this girl was black-hearted. She probably didn't believe a word of the little pig's words. She just wanted a legitimate chance to enter the Yin Mountain. The next morning, at the foot of the Yin Mountain, many disciples of the Immortal Cultivation sect were ready for battle. They knew some inside information more or less. Although they were ordinary disciples on the surface, they were deeply trusted by the Lord. After a while, Wen Hun and Suli came together. The leading middle-aged practitioner greeted them, and said with worry, "First senior fellow apprentice, you must be careful this time. Even if you can't find the Lord, you must come back before dark." Everyone knew that after dark, there were all kinds of horrors in the Yin Mountain. Even if Wen Hun had a special physique, he might not be able to bear it, unless he found Joe before dark. Wen Hun nodded. Seeing this, the middle-aged practitioner glanced at Su Li, who had just joined the sect for a short time. Although he felt strange, he didn't ask much. After all, with all kinds of horrors in the sect, curious people had died long ago. All the disciples took action. The tactical matrix of extreme yang did little harm to people, but it was not without harm. For the existence of half-human and half-ghost like Wen Hun, it must be opened before he could enter. Otherwise, he would be almost burned by the tactical matrix before he entered the Yin Mountain. 8 gates of extreme yang, open. The middle-aged cultivator shouted and waved his hands in an incantation gesture. A beam of white light shot into the spell formation, causing ripples to appear on the transparent barrier. Then, the barrier opened up from the center and turned into a small door that could allow a person to enter. Wen Hun didn't hesitate to pull Su Li into it. Swish! The small door was closed again. The middle-aged practitioner was sweating profusely. He sat on the ground and gasped. A strange smile appeared on his face, but it disappeared in an instant. Others were busy resting, so they didn't see it. Puff! The gray blade instantly cut a wolf-like ghost into 2 parts, and it turned into black smoke and dissipated. It should be just a newly formed ghost. Wen Hun took back the blade and breathed a sigh of relief. As soon as he landed, he saw a sharp mouth full of fangs. Frightened, he pulled out the blade and cut it without saying a word. Unexpectedly, the little ghost was killed by one cut. He had never killed a ghost, which showed how weak this wolf was. However, Master once said that although there were many ghosts in the Yin Mountain, it was extremely difficult to meet them. Why did we meet them as soon as we came in? He frowned and looked at Su Li beside him. The shadow behind Su Li, who was eating, immediately disappeared. She smiled. If you want to know the answer, let's walk more. Okay. Wen Hun nodded. Suddenly, his face became entangled again. After following Su Li for a short distance, he finally couldn't help asking, what should I call you? Although he didn't know the true meaning of Emperor of the Human Race, he could guess that it was a realm that he would never be able to reach in his lifetime. Otherwise, how could a terrifying ghost that had lived for thousands or tens of thousands of years reveal its true form, speak nicely, and even have a hint of humility in it? Even if she didn't care about such a person, it was difficult for him to call her junior sister apprentice. Hearing this, Su Li smiled sweetly, and said softly, since you feel uncomfortable, I won't force you. Call me sister apprentice, or master. Wen Hun was shocked, and blurted out, Master. You are the Grand Elder of Ni sect. Why? Am I famous? Su Li looked back and blinked. Wen Hun scratched his head. I heard from Master that you are extremely mysterious and vicious. With you, Ni sect is likely to be more difficult to deal with than the other 25 sections. If you meet them, you should be careful. Speaking of this, Wen Hun's face turned red. He scratched his head, and said firmly, Master must be wrong. Sister, you disregard your own safety and go into the mountain to kill ghosts. You are obviously extremely benevolent and righteous. How can you be vicious? Hearing this, Black Lotus rolled his eyes. The silly boy was grateful for Su Li's kindness of going into the mountain to kill ghosts, but he ignored a big problem. The Grand Elder of a sect disguised her identity and sneaked into another sect. How could her motive be small? Su Li smiled happily, and even said with a hint of relief, It's great that you can think so. Chapter 526. 34 Chinese Net, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. The road in the Yin Mountain was not complicated. There was only a regular and spacious mountain road leading to the bottom, far into the black dense forest. It was dark and indistinct. Why is the terrain completely different from what is recorded on the map? Wen-hun put down the scroll in his hand, and looked a little confused. Although the map was drawn hundreds of years ago, it was not impossible to find a trace of similarity, right? Did the junior fellow apprentices make a mistake when opening the tactical matrix? This is not the entrance of the Yin Mountain. Wen-hun said in shock, and immediately looked for the pattern similar to the road in front of him on the map. Su-li smiled indifferently, and said, the Yin Mountain is not big. Even if it is sent to the wrong place, we can find it. Wen-hun was stunned. Thinking of the horrible strength that Su-li broke out yesterday, he suddenly felt, it was very reasonable. Even the immortal of ghosts was not her opponent, so the little ghosts and monsters in the Yin Mountain were nothing. When he was about to speak, he suddenly saw Su-li turn her head and stare at his side. Wen-hun's scalp was numb. He moved a few steps away and looked over at the same time. He saw senior sister apprentice Yu, who usually dressed in black, was wearing a dazzling white gauze dress at this moment. She was looking at him with a very strange look. Senior sister apprentice Yu. Wen-hun was in a cold sweat, and patted his chest with a look of lingering fear. Can you make a sound when you come over? You really scared me. Senior sister apprentice Yu, in white, did not respond, but just looked at Wen-hun with watery eyes. After a long time, she opened her mouth and mouthed. Come, the gentle voice blew into Wen-hun's mind like a spring breeze, with an inexplicable breath, so warm. Wen-hun stared at senior sister apprentice Yu, in white, blankly. He felt a pain in his heart without warning, and sadness surged. He touched his eyes, and saw drops of saltiness on his hands. What happened to me? He had never felt this strange feeling. Was it an attack? He soon became alert, and remembered the master's entrustment. He stared at senior sister apprentice Yu, in white, and said, Sister, do you hear any sound? Ha! Su-li raised her eyebrows. Did you hear what she said? Wen-hun nodded solemnly, and slowly pulled out the gray knife from the scabbard. Master is right. Senior sister apprentice Yu can affect my mood this month, but that's all. I will kill her now. Without hesitation, he leaped up and slashed down with his saber. Senior sister apprentice Yu, in white, disappeared in a panic. With a flash of white light, she appeared a little further away from Wen-hun. Looking at Wen-hun, her eyes were full of sadness. You're affecting me again. Wen-hun felt a sharp pain in his heart. He staggered a step and inserted the knife into the ground. He covered his chest with one hand and was about to pull out the knife again. Wait, let's see what she wants to do. Su-li stopped him and looked at the face of senior sister apprentice Yu, in white, with great interest. She smelled a familiar breath and saw a clue. Wen-hun hesitated for a moment and clenched the blade in his hand, but master said, hee. Su-li chuckled. She pointed at the wrinkles between Wen-hun's eyebrows and smoothed them out. I'm here. What are you afraid of? If she really wants to hurt you, I will kill her with a punch. Su-li's words were calm, which calmed Wen-hun down. Then listen to you, sister. Wen-hun nodded his head hesitantly. Suddenly, he found that the pain in his heart was relieved a lot. He took a deep breath. She seems to want to take us to a place. Su-li's eyes flickered, and she chuckled. Let's go and have a look. As Su-li said this, there was a momentary vibration at the end of the mountain road. Although the time was very short, it didn't escape her perception. It seems that the little pig is very bold. Black Lotus was speechless. He was old and shrewd, and had seen a lot of oddities. Su-li must have seen more than him. The white shadow appeared and disappeared from time to time. Every time it appeared, it moved a distance of several meters. Wen Hun had never seen this kind of movement in any ghost. He was full of vigilance, but his eyes couldn't help falling on the white shadow. Even he didn't know what attracted him. This feeling was too strange. Wen Hun touched his heart, full of confusion. The momentary pain almost killed him, but he didn't hate it or hate it at all. It's so strange. Su Li kept walking. No matter what strange terrain the white shadow walked on, or integrated into the mountain rocks, she could flatten it with one foot or punch through it with one punch. There was no obstacle. Wen Hun followed her in a trance, and turned a deaf ear to the sound around him. After advancing in this manner for 2 hours, a flat stone wall appeared before the two of them. The stone wall was as smooth as a mirror, as if it had been deliberately polished. Su Li integrated the white shadow into it. When she was about to punch it, she suddenly raised her eyebrows and took back her fist. Then she walked to the stone wall and reached out to touch it gently. Buzz, the ripples spread, and the stone wall gradually became transparent. Then, a stony mountain mansion came into Wen Hun's eyes through a transparent barrier, which was full of astonishment. You are. Wen Hun walked to the stone wall absent-mindedly, and looked at the tall young man sitting in the mountain mansion. The young man's face was exactly the same as his, and they were 80% similar. Senior Sister Apprentice Yu, in white, nestled beside the young man. Her lips squirmed as if she was saying something, but neither Su Li nor Wen Hun could hear it. It seemed that after hearing the words of Senior Sister Apprentice Yu, in white, the young man raised his head and looked straight at the outside of the stone wall, but he didn't look at Wen Hun. He said calmly, and his voice came out of the stone wall. I heard from your mother that Insi didn't expect that we would meet. Hun, you have suffered these years. Wen Hun trembled all over, and looked at the young man in the stone wall incredulously. He fell down along the stone wall, and muttered, Impossible, I am an orphan, I am. As he said, he suddenly trembled all over. His memory. How could he remember the memory when he was still in infancy? Those were all told by the master. This stone wall can only be seen from the outside. I heard from your mother that you look like me. She recognized you at the first sight. The young man smiled in a carefree manner, but his words were filled with a strong sense of guilt and helplessness. I never thought that you would still be alive. I'm sealed here and can't move an inch. I can't do anything, and I'm not qualified to be your father. However, since you're here, are you willing to talk to this incompetent father of yours? Wen Hun's lips trembled. The sudden truth made him unable to distinguish the truth from the falsehood. His mind went blank, and he couldn't say a word. Su Li wiped the stone wall beside Wen Hun, sat down against it, and chuckled. It seems that you are the new ghost that He Jiu mentioned. Wen Hun trembled, and his nerves were a little numb because of the shock. His nerves were numb from the shock. He muttered, New ghosts. The young man stopped smiling and looked cold. But the words of Senior Sister Apprentice Yu, in white, eased his expression quickly. He said, New ghost. Is that what Insi said? I am Wen Hun's biological father, Wen Yuanqing. Insi. Su Li raised her eyebrows. It's what the ghost under the Hall of the Lord said. According to what you said, that thing is Insi. It seems that you don't know anything. Wen Yuanqing shook his head. It seemed that he didn't want to talk about it. Since you can bring Hun here, you must have some skills. But if you get involved in this matter, you won't have a good end. Leave the immortal cultivation sect as soon as possible, and even, don't stay in Zhuzhou region anymore. Su Li smiled very brightly, but Black Lotus couldn't help shivering. Someone was going to be unlucky. That little pig really lied to me. Su Li whispered to herself, and touched the cheek of Wen Hun, who was absent-minded. Although she was smiling, her tone was very cold. Wen Yuanqing, Your son was raised by Hee-jo, and he also practiced ghost chapter. Now he has become neither a human nor a ghost, and he doesn't have much life left. In this case, do you think he can still leave the immortal cultivation sect? Hee-jo. When Yuan-Ching heard this, his pupils suddenly shrank. He stood up and was about to step out of the stone wall. But Su-li only took one step, and then she heard countless sounds of chains in the mountain wall. Those invisible chains seemed to lock every bone of Yuan-Ching. When he took a step out, he felt a sharp pain as if his bones were crushed. But when Yuan-Ching remained calm, and continued to pull the chains to walk out of the stone wall. Snap! 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 The chains broke one after another as they couldn't bear the heavy load. But soon, many chains shot out from the stone wall and reconnected to the ports. What followed was an even more terrifying suction. When Yuan-Ching's body was stretched out, and his head extended far away. My son. When Yuan-Ching stretched his head out of the stone wall with difficulty. At a glance, he saw a pale and dispirited face leaning against the stone wall, and the hem of clothes faintly emitting red light. Insi, I will kill you. Blue veins stood out all over Yuan-Ching's body, and he looked ferocious. His eyes shed tears of unwillingness, and the dense chains in the stone wall were tightened at the same time. Bang! When Yuan-Ching's body exploded into pieces of minced meat falling in the stone house, and then slowly condensed into shape. His face also became as pale as Wen-Hun's. Is it worth it just to see your son? Su-li picked up a piece of flesh beside her, looked at it, and said with a hint of emotion, you were really a ghost clan when you were alive. It's interesting to become a ghost clan of ghosts. When Yuan-Ching gasped slightly, and his body suddenly stiffened when he heard this, you. At this moment, a hole suddenly exploded in the originally quiet nothingness, and a familiar face stepped out of the hole. My disciple, don't believe in nonsense. Seeing Wen-Hun's distracted look, Hee-jo looked a little angry. I told you that if you hear you talking, you should kill her. Idiot. You actually believe in the words of ghosts and fall into such a situation. Wen-Hun raised his head blankly, and looked at Hee-jo's face. Somehow, he wanted to vomit. Then he looked back at the man who had just shattered his body for him. For a moment, he couldn't distinguish the truth from the lies, and could only look at Su-li imploringly. What should I do? Chapter 527. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. Clatter. The chain was suddenly tightened, and when Yuan-Ching, with a pale face, stood up again. He couldn't see Hee-jo through the stone wall, but he still looked at Hee-jo coldly. If his eyes could kill, Hee-jo would have died thousands of times. Hee-jo was not affected at all. He walked to Wen-Hun, and his face returned to its usual gentleness. He reached out and patted Wen-Hun's thin shoulder. I believe you. The words of ghosts won't make you lose your way. As he said, he turned his eyes to Su-li. A dim light flashed in his eyes, but he cupped his hands and said respectfully, I have received the message from Lord Immortal of Ghost. There is such a strong practitioner like you in NI sect. I wonder why you changed your appearance and came to our sect, for what? As soon as the words came out, Wen-Hun's body suddenly shook, and his eyes on Su-li wavered. Yes, he was possessed. Perhaps all these were the inner demons brought by the new ghosts. As long as he didn't listen and see, everything could return to the original state. Master. Su-yu was the grand elder of NI sect. She must have other purposes to come to the sect. He couldn't believe it. Was the only one he could believe, the master. He tried to convince himself, but at this moment, his heart wavered, and he could no longer believe anyone in the field. Su Li's perception was so keen that she saw the change in Wen Hun's eyes. This silly boy was still too young. As the thought flashed through her mind, her eyes became cold, but her lips were slightly raised. The smile was full of deep meaning. I don't deserve to be called as the senior. I heard that Lord he is so powerful that the disciples you sent have infiltrated the Wanli sect, the Liang sect and other 12 sections. Half of the Zhezhou region is under your control. Is it true? Ha ha ha, He Jiu chuckled and shook his head. Senior, you think too highly of me. It's difficult for me to maintain the sect, and I don't hesitate to make a deal with ghosts. How can I extend my hand to other sects? Really? Then I misunderstood your sect. Su Li's words seemed to be an apology, but her tone was not apologetic at all. Instead, she said with strong interest, however, it's really an eye-opener for me this time. I heard that there is a Yinsi in the mountain who cut his own flesh and blood to feed a sect. I really admire him. Can Lord he introduce me to him? He Jiu's eyes brightened, and he nodded without hesitation. You are a strong man of the human clan. Lord Yinsi will be very happy to see you. Please come with me. As he said, he glanced at Wen Hun, who was still leaning against the mountain wall behind Su Li. When he was about to speak, he heard Su Li said with a smile, your disciple Xinqing is simple. This experience is not a bad thing. I think he has understood something. Lord he doesn't have to punish him. Senior has misunderstood. He Jiu laughed, but his eyes darkened. Wen Hun was still useful. It was a waste to let him follow them. Moreover, with Wen Hun's low cultivation, it was difficult for him to survive, let alone break the stone wall. Everything was under his control. He changed his mind instantly and snorted, I'll give you another chance. Stay here and reflect on your mistakes. If you don't have a heart of stone, you can't cultivate. Then, he smiled again, and waved his hand, Senior, this way, please. Su Li glanced at Wen Hun, who was leaning against the stone wall with his head down. She nodded with a smile, and disappeared in the hole with He Jiu. Until the two disappeared, Wen Hun raised his head, and his eyes were full of pain and self-mockery. His lips were bitten by him at some time, and the bloody smell spread in his mouth. Master, sister. Sister is a liar. Your sister is indeed a liar. When Yuanqing, who had been silent all the time, suddenly spoke and interrupted Wen Hun's self-pity, however, she didn't cheat you, but He Jiu. Wen Hun looked back in amazement, and saw Wen Yuanqing's calm but unfocused eyes. He suddenly felt nervous. My son should be able to distinguish right from wrong. Wen Yuanqing seemed to have figured out Su Li's background. He said in a calm tone, it has been hundreds of years since what happened in those days, but the hatred in my heart has not faded. Instead, it has become stronger. There are some things. Whether you believe it or not, you are qualified to know. As he said, he looked at Senior Sister Apprentice Yu, in white beside him. Senior Sister Apprentice Yu, in white nodded, got up, and floated out of the stone wall. She looked at Wen Hun with a smile, and then stretched out her transparent fingertip, wanting to touch Wen Hun's glabella gently. Wen Hun resisted and tilted his head back. But when he saw the disappointment on Senior Sister Apprentice Yu, in white's face, he stopped and let the cold fingertip touch his glabella. Since he couldn't see anything clearly, he chose to follow his instinct this time. A trace of cold touch poured into the awareness sea through the glabella, and quickly turned into pictures, which flashed back in front of him. He saw a young practitioner who looked very similar to him came to the foot of the mountain of the Immortal Cultivation sect with a woman who looked like Senior Sister Apprentice Yu. They talked and laughed all the way, and came to find his friend He Jiu. When he saw Senior Sister Apprentice Yu was pregnant, the young man was overjoyed. He believed Jo's words and went to the Een mountain to see Insi, so that the fetus in his wife's belly could have a higher starting point on the road of cultivation. Then, under the gloomy and bloody sky, a terrifying giant opened its bloody mouth, and countless masses of rotten flesh wriggled in its mouth, screaming. The young man was so angry that his eyes almost popped out. He helplessly watched senior sister apprentice Yu, who was about to give birth, was dismembered and thrown into the hell-like mouth. He angrily used the forbidden skill of Ghost Clan and sacrificed everything. Finally, he just cut off a mass of rotten flesh and died regretfully. Then, in the long darkness, the souls soaked with unwillingness and hatred seemed to have an incredible change in the Een mountain. He incarnated into a ghost, crazily devoured the ghosts in the Een mountain, and took revenge again. This time, Insi was caught off guard and was seriously injured. But Insi was Insi after all. Even if he became a different ghost, he was still defeated. Relying on the immortality of ghosts, Insi didn't waste his strength to kill him, and only sealed him in the mountain wall. In the long years, he broke free from his chains and committed suicide again and again. He tortured himself again and again. The obsession in his heart became stronger and stronger. In the end, he attracted the ghost floating in the Een mountain and turned it into his wife's appearance. At that moment, he was quiet. His wife was not a ghost, but an inexplicable special existence attached to him. She was very weak, could be seen, could penetrate any matter at will, couldn't be attacked by anyone, and couldn't speak. But he just understood what his wife was expressing. Don't be sad. I will always be with you. The picture seemed to be long, but in fact, everything flashed in Wenhun's mind in a moment. Suddenly opening his eyes, he leaned against the wall and gasped for breath like a drowning fish. His chest heaved up and down violently, and sweat seeped out of his forehead, causing his hair to stick together. He was in a sorry state. The impact of the truth was too great for him to bear. I thought you were eaten by Insi before you came to this world. After all, it took me a lot of time to become a ghost. There was a deeper meaning on Wen Yuanqing's face. There was a long-lost kindness on his face. The ghost's unique voice made this kindness with a strong sense of weirdness. I don't know what method Joe used to keep you alive, but you can practice Ghost Chapter of the Immortal Cultivation Sect. Except for the Ghost Clan, you can practice Ghost Chapter without being affected. Your clothes are red, which is a sign of turning into a ghost. You can't continue to practice Ghost Chapter, otherwise the consequences will be unpredictable. Not all ghosts can keep their minds before death, and I am a special case. Wenhun took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and calmed down completely. When Yuanqing closed his mouth and stopped disturbing him. No matter whether Wenhun believed it or not, that memory could make Wenhun's temperament to a higher level. After the transformation, no one could predict what Wenhun would think. When Yuanqing thought that it would take at least 2 hours for Wenhun to digest all the information. In fact, he opened his eyes in just a few minutes, and his eyes were full of anxiety. Insi and Joe are on the same side. Isn't my sister in danger? When Yuanqing was stunned, and his heart was inexplicably sour. Then he laughed. It seemed that he was not qualified to be jealous of the woman who led Joe away. Your sister is extremely smart. When Yuanqing said with a self-deprecating expression, at least she is much smarter than me. She can see something wrong with Joe at a glance. She just saw Joe's arrogance just now, so that I can have time alone with you. She deliberately led him away. But Insi can't even beat you. My sister, Wenhun gritted his teeth and said. From his memory, he could see that Insi's strength was extremely horrible, more horrible than any existence he had ever seen. Even if Su Li destroyed the Hall of the Lord of Sect with one punch as a lesson, he was still incomparable to the Colossus. Before he finished speaking, there was a burst of applause beside Wen Hun, and there was a chuckle in the applause. Silly boy, I didn't care about you in vain. Su Li's graceful figure appeared out of thin air, and she looked at Wen Hun with a smile. Wen Hun was instantly dumbfounded. He pointed at Su Li, and then turned his head to look at the place where Su Li and Hijio disappeared. Sister, why didn't you and, you mean that? Su Li stroked her hair behind her ears, and said with a smile, that is naturally me. Hijio and Su Li talked and laughed all the way to an ancient and huge pavilion in the Yin Mountain. Senior, Lord Insi is waiting in the pavilion. I won't go in with you. Hijio cupped his hands and stopped in place. Su Li looked up at the huge pavilion in the dark clouds unhurriedly. In her eyes, it was not a pavilion, but a huge ghost with its mouth wide open, waiting for food. Senior, what are you waiting for? Seeing Su Li didn't go in, Hijio asked with a smile. There was no sense of urgency in his words. Su Li smiled sweetly. I'm just thinking about the meat in the room 2 days ago, which was given by Senior Insi. If I don't eat that piece of meat, it will go moldy. If Senior Insi gives me more, how can I keep it? It's really worrying. Hijio's smile froze on his face. Chapter 528. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second, wonderful pop-up window free reading. It was obviously not appropriate to discuss the topic of Insi's flesh and blood in front of Insi. Hijio laughed awkwardly and didn't know what to say to trick Su Li. At this time, he suddenly heard a strong thought from Insi. Extremely pure ghost energy. She is the best blood food like Wen Yuanqing, even better than Wen Yuanqing. After eating her, I can restore my peak strength and even go further. Hijio's expression froze for a moment, and then his eyes immediately turned into surprise. An emperor of the human clan and ghosts were of different origins, so the benefits were limited. In addition, he was afraid of Su Li's unknown background. Originally, he only planned to let Insi control this woman, and then let her go and continue to be dormant. But after hearing Insi's words, he immediately forgot all the cautiousness. If Insi could recover, he didn't have to worry at all. He straightened his bowed back, and a weird smile spread rapidly on his face. Your Excellency, there is one thing I think you should understand. What? Su Li's attention was attracted, but she didn't see a purple-black arc suddenly burst out like thunder behind her. Puff! The ferocious scale armor pierced her chest from behind. Ha 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 ha. Hijio swung his ferocious purple tail and pulled it out from Su Li's chest. What emperor? I was expecting. Before he finished speaking, he suddenly noticed that there was no blood on the bloody hole in Su Li's chest. It's a trap. His expression changed slightly. Without saying a word, he stamped his feet, and a gust of wind rose. He retreated quickly with the box. But he only retreated a few feet, and his figure was forcibly stagnated in the air. He didn't know when his thick purple-black scale tail was firmly pinched by a slender hand. Su Li raised her head slightly, and her eyes under her hair were like a pitch-black deep pool, full of pity. It turns out to be a small lizard. It's old, and its meat is not very delicious. You are courting death. Hijio had never been so humiliated, especially by his recognized food. He immediately became angry, and the purple-black muscles bulged from the loose skin. In the blink of an eye, he broke the disguise of the human clan, and turned into a ghost lizard with a height of 30 feet. His hands turned into claws, like sharp knives, and stabbed at Su Li's eyes. It's really barbaric food. Su Li licked her red lips, and the light in her eyes faded away. She no longer suppressed the nature of evil ghost. At the moment when Hijio's claws pierced into Su Li's eyes, Suli seemed to melt like ice and snow. She turned into a pool of black liquid and quickly climbed up along the claws. At the same time, a tingling pain came from her arms to her brain, as if there were thousands of mouths gnawing at her flesh and blood in the pool of liquid. What the hell? It can actually devour me. I'm a ghost. Hee-jo was shocked, and an unprecedented fear rose in his heart. He screamed, "Insi, do it. Save me." Boom. The pavilion in the dark clouds collapsed in the blink of an eye. Lumps of rotten flesh quickly gathered together from the collapsed pavilion, turning into a mountain of flesh. The mountain of flesh squirmed for a while, and countless legs grew out from its bottom. It was surprisingly agile, and in the blink of an eye, it flashed behind Hee-jo, opened its huge mouth, and swallowed Hee-jo along with it. "I'll eat it." A huge face appeared on the surface of Insi's flesh mountain. He burped and his whole body squirmed. White steam rose from his body as he tried his best to digest the food. Suddenly, his expression changed drastically. He opened his trembling mouth and took a deep breath. Whoosh! An extremely strong suction appeared out of thin air. The wind and clouds changed, and the whole mountain was raging. Countless ghosts screamed and were sucked into the mouth of the mountain of flesh. Even the dead trees around were pulled off the ground and flew to the mountain of flesh. Why is the wind suddenly blowing? Wen-hun stood up in surprise, and looked at the source of the suction from a distance. Because of the seal on the mountain wall, the suction he felt was very small, but he still felt dizzy and his soul was unstable. The power of the seal is getting weaker. When Yuanqing's eyes flashed, and his unfocused sight fell on the Numa beside Wen-hun. Insi is stalled. "Sister, this," Wen-hun was about to ask, and suddenly there was a loud noise in his ears. Boom! It seemed that something exploded. Blood dyed half of the sky, and then fell down. Wen-hun subconsciously caught a piece of debris flying over. He fixed his eyes on it, and found it was a wriggling rotten flesh. He was so scared that he immediately threw it away. At this moment, there was a harsh scream in his ears. He looked up and saw a stream of light zooming in his eyes like a meteor. Boom! The earth quaked and the mountain shook. The stream of light fell into the hard rocks of Mountain, and the whole ground cracked like a spider web. The cracks extended along the ground to the stone wall, and a strong and cold pneuma escaped from the cracks. Clatter, the chain rattled. When Yuanqing stood up, and saw the figure in the center of the crack at the same time as Wen-hun. That was the evil ghost, which had been digested with only half of its body. Its surface was stained with a lot of yellow water stains, and the remaining part was still corroding tirelessly. What is this? Wen-hun only felt that his scalp was numb, but he did not look away. Soon he found a trace of familiarity from the corroded half-face, and couldn't help but widen his eyes. At this time, half of the evil ghost's body suddenly stood up like a corpse. The ghost energy around it vibrated, and all the yellow water stains were shaken off. Then it returned to the shadow as Suli waved her hand. My speed of devouring is not as fast as Insi. It seems that the means of Ghost Clan are not enough. Suli's eyes flickered, and she saw the huge black shadow approaching slowly in the distance. She gently covered the stone wall with her palm, and said, Wen-hun, retreat to the back of the mountain. Wen-hun trembled all over, and immediately retreated to the back of the mountain. He had been shocked too many times tonight, and his heart had been numb. At this moment, even if the sky fell down, he could not be more shocked. Seeing this, Suli turned her head, and her red lips curved slightly. The golden thunder in her palm instantly filled the gap. Boom! The stone wall was torn and collapsed directly like a piece of fragile white paper. When Yuan Qing, who was still secretly accumulating power, was slightly stunned. He punched in the air, which made him a little uncomfortable. However, he quickly adapted to it. When he smelled the pneuma of divine thunder in the air, he couldn't help but shrink his pupils, and was secretly horrified. Why is there the pneuma of divine thunder? Is it Hermines? At the same time, Su Li's voice came, and her tone was a little meaningful. Protect your son, and you'd better stay away. When Yuanqing's eyes flashed with fear, and he pulled Wen Hun to retreat. He just got out of trouble, and was very weak, so he couldn't help. Besides, he was really afraid that he would be destroyed by the divine thunder. Insi didn't dare to lead to the test of thunder, but this woman was not a ghost. If she had the means of thunder, she might be able to kill Insi. Boom! Boom! Hills were flattened one after another, and Insi's huge figure slowly appeared in everyone's sight through the mist. His pale and pitted skin looked very gloomy and horrible under the moonlight. In the center of the mountain of flesh, there was a basin-sized bloody hole. The rotten flesh squirmed, and the bloody hole was constantly shrinking. He Zhou, who turned into his original body, stood on the top of the mountain of flesh. At this moment, his arms that were devoured by Su Li had grown out again. He looked at Su Li with bloodshot eyes. You are the first one who dares to destroy my original body in thousands of years. Is that the true face of He Zhou? In the distance, Wen Hun's eyes were blank. At this moment, he finally recognized the truth. Everything he saw in that memory was true. Su Li smiled sweetly. Her petite figure standing under the mountain of flesh looked very small. The taste of ghosts is very good. At least, my shadow likes you very much. As soon as these words came out, even the ghost, who represented horror, couldn't help but feel a chill. He was furious and stopped talking nonsense. Insi, eat her. The mountain of flesh squirmed for a while, and the chilly wind blew. The fierce suction force acted on Su Li's whole body again. But the state of evil ghost in Su Li's original body couldn't be compared with a single evil ghost. She raised her eyebrows, stepped on a crack under her feet, and disappeared instantly. So fast. What a strong physical body. When Yuan Qing marveled in his heart. He had never seen a human clan that could refine their physical body to such a degree. Could it be that the weakness of the human clan's physical body had been eliminated in Qingshui's circle after the rule changed? Bang! Su Li punched the mountain of flesh, and the shock wave rippled. The surrounding flesh and blood instantly exploded into holes, and countless rotten flesh fell down. But in the blink of an eye, the holes were filled by rotten flesh again. Su Li didn't intend to stop at all. Relying on the absolute speed, she turned into a sky full of residual shadows, and the mountain of flesh bloomed everywhere. When Yuan Qing frowned and couldn't help but remind her, Insi's body is very small. What you hit is the rotten flesh on the surface of his body. It can't cause any damage at all. Boom! Su Li punched another bloody hole with a width of 30 meters again, as if she didn't hear it. It was rare for a human target to stand her full strength. How could she be willing to kill it at once? He Zhou, who blended into the protection of the rotten flesh, looked at Su Li who was beating crazily outside, and he was shocked and angry. Why? My means don't have any effect. How could he let Su Li beat Insi violently? At this moment, he almost used all the means of ghosts such as poison, illusion, erosion, infiltration, and so on, but Su Li didn't respond at all. Was she still a fragile human clan? What are you waiting for? No matter how many layers of flesh I have, I shouldn't waste them like this. Insi's angry thought came. He had never been humiliated by a little bug since he had consciousness. Now he just wanted to end it quickly and eat this little bug to restore his strength. He-jo was aggrieved. Seeing that Insi's thought became colder and colder, he finally told the truth. Do you think I don't want to? All my means are useless to her. What? Insi's body trembled. He was much older than He-jo, so he immediately thought of the natural enemy of ghosts that had been extinct for a long time. He was extremely timid, so he didn't say a word. Hundreds of feet grew out from the bottom of his feet, and he retreated quickly. Want to escape? Suli narrowed her eyes and sighed softly. It's really boring. Before she finished speaking, her figure had disappeared like a phantom, and then appeared on the head of Insi, who was moving quickly. This time, even when Yuanqing didn't see it clearly. She became faster. She has never shown her real strength. When Yuanqing's pupils shrank suddenly, and he pulled Wenhun to hide further subconsciously. The next moment, a golden line between heaven and earth dispersed the dark clouds. Chapter 529. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second. Wonderful pop-up window free reading. Cloud-piercing golden line. Even if it was far away, when Yuanqing could smell the strong smell of sharp divine thunder drifting from a distance. It's really divine thunder of gold. Is this person a disciple of the holy sect of Wind Thunder? But the stubborn people of the holy sect of Wind Thunder are always hotheads. When they see something contaminated with ghost energy, they will boast of being righteous and kill it. After she killed the evil ghost, the next one. He frowned and said in a deep voice, "Let's go and have a look." Wenhun had long wanted to know the situation of the battle, so he immediately followed Yuanqing. Sizzle, under the action of divine thunder, the rotten flesh was irreversibly consumed. Finally, Insi revealed his real body, a black pig as tall as 2 people. It turns out that you are really a little pig. It seems that the one under the Hall of the Lord is your clone. Suli stopped the bombardment of divine thunder and summoned Songlei's cave to hover over Insi's head. Another more powerful breath of divine thunder instantly shrouded them, making Insi and He-jo completely desperate. Sisterly, what is this? It disgusts me so much. In Songlei's cave, Su Bai stretched out a thunder branch and then took it back. He pointed to Hong Baizhu, who lived at the other end of Songlei's cave, but it's not as annoying as her. Hong Baizhu's little face became serious, and she transmitted the sound in disgust. I hate you, too. In a sense, you are each other's natural enemies. But now you are all mine, so you are not allowed to fight. Su Li transmitted the sound, and Su Bai nodded obediently. The little girl Hong Baizhu immediately put away her fierce expression and shrank back to the depth of Songlei's cave. Su Li laughed in her heart. Divine thunder and ghosts were supposed to kill each other as soon as they met. It was also a wonder that such a harmonious side appeared under her control. Insi and He-jo saw that Su Li was distracted, but the breath of divine thunder above their heads was more magnificent than that of Jinwoo. They could not find a chance to escape at all. Now I ask, and you answer. Do you hear me clearly? Su Li looked back at them, and her tone was as leisurely as 2 days ago. But Insi could no longer act as calmly as before. He trembled and panicked. Emperor, please spare my life. Everything is planned by Thousand-Faced Ghost. It has nothing to do with me. Who is the Thousand-Faced Ghost? Before Insi answered, Su Li heard a voice behind her. The Thousand-Faced Ghost is He-jo. He-jo is my bosom friend. After being eaten by the Thousand-Faced Ghost, the Thousand-Faced Ghost changed into He-jo's appearance and tricked me into a dead end. When Yuanqing stood not far from Su Li. He originally wanted to sound out her background, but when he thought of her overbearing character just now, he finally swallowed his words of testing. Su Li nodded gently, and her gentle eyes fell on He-jo. So, tell me, how is the plan to control the 12 sets going? The longer one lived, the more one cherished his life. No, the thousand-faced ghost, couldn't jump out of this rule either. He scolded Insi in his heart for betraying him even when he was about to die. After a moment of silence, he braced himself and asked, "If I tell you, can you spare my life?" Suli raised her eyebrows and said in a gentle tone, "Give me a reason to let you go." "We can't let him go." When Yuanqing was full of hatred, but he couldn't calm down after all. He couldn't help but say, "The thousand-faced ghost is cunning and vicious. He is definitely a scourge. We can't let him live." Suli glanced at Wen Yuanqing. Although she didn't show any intention, Wen Yuanqing was stiff all over, and the alarm in his heart rang loudly. This was a warning. She was warning me not to meddle in other people's business. To this end, this woman is definitely not as gentle and kind as she looks on the surface. She is not a member of the Holy Fenglei sect. She may also be an alien of the Holy Fenglei sect. Several thoughts flashed through Wen Yuanqing's mind, and he was more afraid of Suli. Wen Hun was young, but he couldn't see things as deeply as his father. He just thought secretly that Sister Su controlled the life and death of ghosts. How awesome! Did you hear that? You are a scourge. Why should I let you live? Suli said slowly, and the golden thunder arc lingered on her fingertips. When Yuanqing immediately retreated a few steps without a trace. "Your Excellency, I'm useful. I'm absolutely useful." Hijio seemed to have grabbed onto a straw before drowning, and he desperately said, "The key figures of the 12 sects are all under my control. So long as Your Excellency Emperor gives the order, the 12 sects will be at your disposal." Ho ho, when Yuanqing sneered, and undermined him, "I taught you the secret method of controlling people, which is a method of our ghost clan. Since you are loyal to this senior, why don't you hand over the control jade token? That will show your sincerity, isn't it?" Hijio's face turned blue, and he stared at Wen Yuanqing. He transmitted the sound gloomily, "Don't forget that you are also a ghost. She controls the divine thunder, and it's easy for her to kill us. If you help her now, you will die in the end." When Yuanqing scratched his ears, and said lightly, transmitting the sound in front of me, "It seems that you are not going to be loyal to this Her Excellency Emperor." Hijio's face was completely gloomy, and he pinched an emerald jade token in his hand. The awe for Suli in his eyes faded away, and he was full of desperate madness. "Let me go. Otherwise, I will crush the jade token. No one can get the right to control the 12 sects." When Yuanqing sneered, "Thousand-faced ghost, it seems that you are old, and your memory is not very good. Let me help you recall. The means of our ghost clan usually have a back door, and only our ghost clan can control it. If I haven't got out of trouble, you can do whatever you want. But in front of me, do you want to die together with me?" "No way." Hijio's pupils shrank suddenly, and he was shocked. At the moment when he was distracted, the thunder in Tsang Lei's cave poured down, and burned Hijio into ashes in the blink of an eye. Jingle, the emerald jade token fell to the ground, and automatically flew into Su Li's hand. When Yuanqing calmed down, and said calmly, "There is no back door in the means of our ghost clan. What we did just now was to deceive the thousand-faced ghost, so you can use this jade token at ease." Su Li glanced up at Wen Yuanqing's tense face, and said with a chuckle, "Of course, I know the means of the ghost clan. You don't have to explain." Seeing this, Wen Hun suddenly realized, "It turns out that it was all a trap set by my sister and my father." Thinking of the word father, Wen Hun suddenly became more like a thief, and shrank back without a trace. Although he hadn't accepted the sudden appearance of father, he thought in his heart that no one would find it. Insi was dumbfounded when he saw this scene. He-Jiu was still alive and kicking a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, he was the only one left. I heard that your flesh and blood can enhance the soul. Su-Li put away the jade token and then asked. Insi was stunned and immediately nodded wildly. Yes. My flesh and blood can enhance the soul. As long as I don't die, I can be reborn. As soon as he finished speaking, when Yuanqing said faintly, he is lying. Insi's flesh and blood are useless. What they provide to the disciples of the immortal cultivation sect is the flesh and blood of another mysterious ghost. If you eat too much of that flesh and blood, you will become a ghost and become their food. Those of the human clan that they let go have been brainwashed long ago in order to go down the mountain for him. They bring new potential food. Insi was suddenly frightened. How do you know? The ghost clan has a talent called Virtual Eye, which can see all the scenes within 100 miles. This is the most useless talent in the ghost clan. When Yuanqing grinned when he said this, you never set up the isolation matrix when you talk with the thousand-faced ghost. After hundreds of years, it is enough for me to know all your secrets. After that, when Yuanqing turned his eyes and said to Su-Li, this time, what I said is true. Su-Li raised her eyebrows, and the thunder and lightning poured down from the cave. Even for the revenge of Wen Hun. I never intend to let them live. Su-Li curled her lips, what I said is also true. When Yuanqing, in the belly of Yin Mountain, when Yuanqing took Su-Li and Wen Hun to a bloody mountain of flesh. This is the place where Insi and others collect flesh. I heard that the owner of the immortal cultivation sect here, before when Yuanqing finished his words, he suddenly felt a very cold pneuma coming to his face. Then a red and white dress flashed by. The little girl stood in front of the mountain of flesh with a red face and cried, "Don't look at it." When Yuanqing stared at her slightly. This little girl, no. The pneuma of the little ghost was exactly the same as that of the mountain of flesh. Su-Li laughed out, it turns out that this is your original body. You are actually turned into meat. The little girl was immediately anxious, and tears of blood flowed down from her eyes. Don't laugh. The mountain of flesh was taken away by the little girl as expected. Although she didn't know where Hong Baizhu put it, it didn't prevent her from knocking it into Tsang Lei's cave, so Su-Li didn't bother to investigate it. Su-Li didn't want to stay here any longer, and directly left the mess of the immortal cultivation sect to Wen Yuanqing. Within 8 years, I want to see a ghost sect that I can use. When Yuanqing was shocked, and his eyes brightened. I will live up to your expectations. At the gate of the soul cultivation sect. Wen Hun watched Su-Li go away, and his expression was still a little blank. In just 2 days, his life had undergone earth-shaking changes. It was like a dream. When Yuanqing smiled and said slowly, people's fate is changeable, like the clouds in the sky and the dogs in the sky. Don't feel confused. We can have a promising future if we follow her. But I have entered the erosion period, and I will degenerate into a ghost in a year at most. How can I talk about the future? Wen Hun was very frustrated. When Yuanqing was suddenly stunned. He sniffed and couldn't help frowning, my senses can't be wrong. Although you have a trace of the smell of the red dress, it is still far from becoming a ghost. Even if you keep practicing ghost chapter, it will take at least 200 years. How can there be the erosion period? Did I make a mistake? Wen Hun was relieved when he heard the words, and then said strangely, but my body has become inexplicably relaxed recently, and I don't feel tired. When Yuanqing smiled slightly. Obviously, he was a gloomy ghost, but his smile was gentle. Someone has helped you to recuperate secretly. Think about what you have refined or eaten recently. Wen Hun was still not used to communicating with his father, who suddenly appeared. He scratched his head subconsciously, and then the time when he ate in Su Li's courtyard for 3 meals a day suddenly flashed in his mind. I see. He was suddenly enlightened, and then he felt warm and bitter in his heart. Those days will never come again. Chapter 530. Remember in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. You've finally come back. Hua Yan came over and rolled her eyes. Then she asked, Yen Zai and others have been waiting outside the mountain gate for 2 months, but you didn't summon them. Is the rumor about the immortal cultivation sect true or false? Su Li raised her hand and showed the jade rune. It was rare for her to show off. I do it in person. There is no reason to fail. Speaking of this, she raised her eyebrows. Ask Zai and others to come back. I have subdued the immortal cultivation sect, but its nature is a bit special, and it is not suitable for other people in the sect to contact. Special? Hua Yan raised an eyebrow. Su Li said, Yen, do you believe that there are ghosts in the world? Ghost? Hua Yan was puzzled. It's nothing more than a secular saying. It's a hallucination caused by mortals being contaminated with yin qi. You and I are cultivators. How can we believe this? Su Li shook her head and smiled, saying faintly. Maybe for today's clear Qingshui circle, you are right, but there are ghosts in the world. At least there are many in the immortal cultivation sect. If you are curious, you can go and have a look. Hua Yan felt her hair stand on end, and a layer of goosebumps appeared all over her body. She laughed and scolded, I haven't seen you for 2 months, and your ghost story has improved. You can even fool me. Su Li was helpless. What I said is true. Only a ghost would believe you. Hua Yan rolled her eyes. I'm going to inform Yen Zai. As for going to the immortal cultivation sect, forget it. It's tiring enough to help you manage this small territory. Since the immortal cultivation sect has surrendered to us, we will see each other in the future. Hua Yan snorted and floated away. Su Li couldn't help laughing and ignored her. She looked down at the jade rune in her hand that had recognized her as the owner. The jade talisman was real. This had been verified by the Black Lotus, so there could be no mistake. After thinking for a while, Su Li sent a majestic thought to the jade token. Everyone, come see me. In the wilderness where spiritual energy was sparse. The mountain winds howled, and all that entered their eyes was a desolate place. This was a place that cultivators wouldn't even be willing to linger for a second. On the peak of the mountain, a black lotus quietly bloomed at the corner of the beautiful woman's eyes. Her delicate face carried a coldness that did not match her age. The strong wind blew, and her white dress fluttered. It was as if she was about to ascend to heaven in the next moment. Suddenly, shwa 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 shwa. Streaks of light rapidly approached and descended, turning into 12 faces of varying heights, young and old. Without exception, all of them were at the early stage of soul formation. With this number, the immortal cultivation sect could at least enter the top 3 of the 25 sections. You're all quite punctual. Did you come together? A sweet and clear voice rang in everyone's ears. Su Li turned around with a light smile. When everyone saw that the person who had summoned them was not Hizhou, but a woman, all the guesses that they had made on the way here were instantly overturned. Everyone's faces were filled with uncertainty. Su Li squinted her long and narrow eyes, and her curly eyelashes trembled. She said in a cold voice, I am your new master. Although you are controlled, you still have your wits. I like it very much. New master. The only red-dressed female cultivator among the 12 people stepped forward. Her breasts were like billowing waves, and her red lips were like fire. Her beauty was boundless. She looked up and down at Su Li's excessively young face, covered her mouth and chuckled, revealing a pair of sharp eyes, little sister, did you steal the jade rune from somewhere? How dare you call us here? Aren't you afraid of losing your life? As soon as she said this, the 5 people behind her immediately laughed. Their eyes became unkind. Suli couldn't help but raise her eyebrows, as if she didn't realize that she had fallen into a dangerous situation. She said with a smile, "It seems that the 12 of you are not united. You are the leader of this half," so, she turned her eyes to an ordinary-looking tall and thin practitioner standing in front of her on the other side. The tall and thin practitioner's eyes flashed, and he knelt on one knee without hesitation. Nieminger pays respect to the new master. Ha 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 ha. Before Suli said anything, she heard the woman with makeup trembling with laughter. Nieminger, you are really shameless. New master. I'll let her become your dead master immediately. Before she finished her words, the woman with makeup suddenly turned cold, and her black claws instantly grabbed Suli's head, as if the latter's skull would be crushed in the next moment. Stop! Nieminger shouted angrily, but his hands didn't move, and the 5 people behind him also didn't move. Suli tilted her head and smiled. She didn't move. Boom. The woman with makeup spat out blood and flew backward. She turned into a red shadow and shot out like a cannonball. She hit a long pit and didn't stop until she hit several feet into the mountain wall. Her whole body hung on the mountain wall, and her pneuma instantly weakened. Everyone behind the female practitioner with makeup changed their expressions. What happened just now? Nieminger swallowed his saliva and said loudly, Master's cultivation is unparalleled, and she is mighty. Before he finished his words, Suli waved her hand, and the latter also spat out blood and flew backward. He was swept out dozens of feet away. Now, the other 5 people who were still glad that they stood on the right side also turned pale and froze in the same place. The female practitioner with makeup got up first. Her clothes were ragged, and her face was swollen. She kept coughing up blood. Nieminger crawled for a long time, but he couldn't get up. He was more seriously injured than the female practitioner with makeup. You two, one is a brainless fool, and the other is a fence-sitter. I don't like either of you. Suli pinched the jade token with both hands and shook it. Her tone was full of disgust. If you hadn't lurked in the 25 sects for a long time, I wouldn't have kept you alive. You should be glad that you still have some value. As soon as she said that, an invisible pressure shrouded them. Everyone lowered their heads and didn't dare to look directly at Suli, especially those who laughed just now. They were afraid that they would be seriously injured in an instant like Nieminger and Suli. Suli raised her eyebrows. Someone come out to speak. Everyone was stunned. One of the people of Minger's faction stood out and decisively knelt down. Wang Yuan, the law enforcement elder of Wanli sect, greets the new master. With him taking the lead, the rest of the people immediately knelt down one by one. Hu Dao, the 4th elder of the inner branch of Chuanyan sect, greets the new master. Qing Shihai, the 3rd elder of the inner branch of Tianhu Valley, greets the new master. Suli nodded gently and wrote down everyone's names one by one. Then she flicked her fingers, and 2 green lights went into the bodies of the 2 people who were still kneeling under the mountain wall. Which sect are you from? The female practitioner with makeup immediately felt that her injury was mostly healed. She was in awe and bowed down respectfully. Master, I am Mu Hong, the deputy lord of Wanli sect. Oh. No wonder you dare to fight as soon as you meet. It turns out that you are in a high position in the 3rd sect. Suli ridiculed. Mu Hong immediately lowered her head in shame. I dare not. I was reckless. Why don't you dare? I think you are very daring. Suli teased and her eyes fell on Nieminger. So, you must be the senior of Liang sect, the 4th sect. I dare not. Nieminger's scalp was numb. He quickly lowered his head and said in a timid voice, "I am the deputy lord of Liang's sect. I have a little power in my hand. I am willing to go through fire and water for you. That's enough. I don't like hypocrisy." Su Li waved her hand and looked indifferent. "I don't care whether you are sincere or hypocritical. You are in a high position all year round, and it is normal for you to have some thoughts. But in front of me," Su Li said coldly, "you'd better put it away." Everyone was shocked and kept quiet out of fear. "In 8 years, I will unify the Zhuzhou region. At that time, if you can still obey me, I don't mind making each of you a lord." Su Li casually dropped a bomb in everyone's heart. Mu Hong's first thought was that she didn't believe it. But when she thought that the female practitioner in front of her could even snatch things from ghosts, she couldn't help but hesitate. "There are not many things you need to do. When you go back, monitor the whereabouts of the most powerful people in the sect, and then send a message to me. The second is to prepare for the attack on Yushu's sect and Zihan's sect." Niamingzhi nodded frequently. Then he hesitated for a moment and asked what everyone was thinking. "The other 11 sects." Su Li smiled. "Of course, I will act with you." Everyone was shocked again. In this way, the woman in front of them already had a total of 23 sects in her hands, which was much bigger than the Immortal Cultivation sect. Even the Immortal Cultivation sect has become hers. Mu Hong's pupils shrank suddenly. She nodded without hesitation. Even the horrible ghosts in the Yin Mountain were cleaned up by her. What were the other sects? In her opinion, Yushu's sect and Zihan's sect were not as good as the Immortal Cultivation sect. "I like your attitude." Su Li nodded with satisfaction and smiled. Mu Hong's body was still aching. At this moment, when she heard this sentence, she felt flattered for a while. She had a better understanding of the temperamental character of the new master. "Well, go back. I will wait for your news. Don't let me down." Su Li waved her hand. After the crowd bowed, they flew away one after another. Finally, only Mu Hong and Niamingzhi were left. They looked at each other and smiled bitterly. The original hostile relationship disappeared without a trace. They originally insisted on betraying Hezhou. Now, a more powerful master suddenly changed, who was so powerful that they were desperate. Any faction was useless. The two put on new clothes from their universe rings, bowed and left. Su Li counted on her fingers and found it only took her about 10 minutes. It's almost time. After dealing with the old bastards of the 12 sects, only the main course is left. Su Li's eyes were cold. "Little Su Li, don't be careless. The ghosts of the Immortal Cultivation sect are restrained by you. For ordinary practitioners, when Yuan Qing and Yin Si are equivalent to half a junior emperor, but for you, they are just a little higher than the nature's test. If you fight with Zihan's sect and Yushu's sect at the same time, you can't defeat 4 people in a junior emperor." Black Lotus couldn't help but remind her. Recently, Su Li had made too big a step. It only took 2 months to solve the problem that should have taken several years. He was really afraid that Su Li would be too excited and directly run to death. Su Li smiled leisurely. "How could it be? I am very afraid of death. I will go back and rest for 2 days. I will be busy later." As soon as she finished speaking, a breeze blew. There was no one on the mountain top. Chapter 531. 34 Chinese Network, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. After returning to Ni sect again, Su Li rarely had leisure time. She took out the harvest in Jiuli region and cooked a few delicacies for Hua Yan and others. Although the memory of Yan Zai, Dongfang Wuxue and others in the reincarnation mirror did not fade, they never thought that Su Li would still be willing to cook after returning to Qingshui's circle. Then, they ate to their heart's content. After all, they didn't have this blessing in the world of the reincarnation mirror. As for LVU and others who didn't know Su Li's origin, they were even more amazed. Su Li was happy to see everyone's reaction. After a few days, they were finally interrupted by the arrival of a person. The main hall, covered with green tiles on the top of the mountain, was open on all sides. The breeze was gentle, and it was comfortable and pleasant. The woman with heavy makeup carefully walked into the main hall. Looking at the casual and simple layout in the main hall, she felt out of place and couldn't help but feel surprised. How could the new master, who was so overbearing and surly, live in such a refined and elegant place? "What are you thinking about?" The woman with heavy makeup heard the familiar voice and immediately shivered. She turned to look at the small door connected to the back hall and saw Su Li coming with a smile. Different from the fierce dress of the heavy soul black robe in the past, Su Li wore a pure white gauze dress. She walked silently and looked like a gentle fairy who was above the world. The woman with heavy makeup had already learned what kind of fierce face was hidden under the delicate appearance, so she immediately knelt down. "Slave Mu Hong pays respect to the master." Su Li nodded gently and opened her red lips slightly. "In the future, you don't need to call yourself slave or master. Just call me master. Since you come to me, you must have gained something, right?" Mu Hong only thought it was a means for the new master to win people's hearts. She was calm and quickly replied, "Master, I have stayed in Wanli's sect for hundreds of years and only met the Grand Elder once. After that, the Grand Elder practiced in isolation. If it is not related to the survival of the sect, he will not come out. There is no elders' union in Wanli's sect, and the real power is in the hands of the deputy lords and the lord. I am the chief deputy lord, so I only need to control the lord to control the Wanli sect." Su Li nodded with appreciation in her eyes. "It's rare for you to be so frank when you are in this position." Mu Hong lowered her head and her eyes flashed. Then, she said, "Sir, you're wrong. You're a strong cultivator. The cultivation world is a place where the strong prey on the weak. If you're not strong enough, you can only be trampled on. Although I, Mu Hong, am arrogant, I respect the strong. You are even more powerful than the Grand Elder of Wanli sect. With you as my backer, why wouldn't I be happy?" He. Su Li chuckled and said meaningfully, "I hope you are telling the truth." Mu Hong's heart tightened. She raised her head and said, "I'm here to show my loyalty. Although the 12 of us are the pawns of the immortal cultivation sect, we have already formed our own camps. I have also placed a lot of spies in the other 11 sections. Niamingzhi seems to have a sign of betrayal. At present, I don't know whether he has exposed your existence. This matter is critical. You must deal with it carefully. There's such a thing." Su Li still smiled. "I'll arrange someone to deal with this matter. You stay for a while, and I'll send someone to meet you." Then, Su Li waved her hand and walked away. "I still have a dish on the stove. It can't be burned." Seeing that the new master didn't seem to take her words seriously at all, Mu Hong's heart sank. She suddenly began to doubt whether she had taken the right step. It's no wonder. Anyone who controls the power of the 12 sects will inevitably be proud and look down on other sections. But the distribution of the power of the 25 sects is uneven. If Yushu's sect knew in advance and cooperated with Niamingzhi, Mu Hong was secretly disappointed. Not long after, strange footsteps sounded. Yen Zai walked over with a cold expression. A familiar pressure came over to Mu Hong, which made her feel a chill in her heart and gave birth to a little hope. The person who met her was not a simple person. Burp, an ear-piercing burp broke the silence, and Mu Hong's solemn expression instantly became sluggish. Yen Zai was speechless and looked embarrassed. Damn it, the dishes you made are so delicious that I accidentally ate more. LVU, who was observing in secret, almost laughed out loud. You called that a little bit more. If you hadn't eaten indiscriminately, the master wouldn't have made another pot. Ahem, with a cough, Yen Zai forcibly covered up the embarrassment and said coldly, follow me. Mu Hong followed Yen Zai to a side hall. The decoration of the hall was extremely simple. There were shelves on all sides of the walls, on which a large number of jade slips were piled. They were wrapped by the isolation tactical matrix. In the center, there was a set of wooden tables and chairs. Sit down. Mu Hong sat down and was about to emphasize the importance of Niemingzhi's matter. Yen Zai waved his hand and said, don't worry. I've got the news from the master about what you said. It's not urgent. The Lord of Liang's sect has been out recently. As you said, Niemingzhi will definitely choose to contact the first elder of Liang's sect. I'll ask Dong Minglan. Mu Hong was stunned. Dong Minglan. Wasn't she the first elder of Liang's sect? Ask her directly. Before she could ask, Yen Zai had already flicked out a crystal-clear communication talisman and disappeared into the void. Not long after, a similar communication jade talisman was sent back, and a familiar voice sounded through the jade talisman. This female cultivator's voice, which was very majestic in Mu Hong's memory, was gentle at the moment. Deputy Lord Yen, it's true. Niemingzhi has been controlled by me. I will never let him affect the master's plan. So, how should we deal with Niemingzhi? After hearing this, Mu Hong finally understood. No wonder the new master was not anxious at all. It turned out that Liang's sect had been infiltrated long ago. Dong Minglan is the master's person. Then Liang's sect. Mu Hong remembered what Su Li said before and couldn't help but ask, didn't the master say that she only controlled 11 sects? Yen Zai raised his eyebrows, which was very similar to Su Li's usual way. The master did completely control only 11 sects, but she never said that we only infiltrated 11 sections. Mu Hong was shocked by the huge amount of information and couldn't breathe smoothly. Her pupils shrank and she tentatively asked, then the lord of my Wanli sect? Yen Zai smiled, not yet. Apart from you, there are only a few mediocre vice sect masters who have submitted. Mu Hong felt cold in her heart. Could she believe this sentence? She thought she had seen everything about the new master, but after coming today, she found that what she saw turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. It's ridiculous that I was wavering before. Mu Hong thought with lingering fear. If she was not firm, she might end up like Niemingzhi. Relax. Yen Zai smiled and began to comfort Mu Hong very familiarly. The master is not as terrible as you think. Although you are controlled by the master, you still have your sanity. You are lucky. As long as you don't betray us, there are many benefits. You will know in the future. Mu Hong forced a smile. She nodded, but her pale face still betrayed her inner uneasiness. Yen Zai was not in a hurry. He had done this kind of work most of these years, and he had long been familiar with it. He let Mu Hong go back first and find a chance to trick the lord out. When the Wanli sect fell into his hands, Mu Hong couldn't do anything. Thinking of this, Yen Zai reached out and waved his hand. A register flew out of the shelf, on which there were densely packed names. Yen Zai turned to the last page and started to write. Mu Hong, Huashan Realm. Although she has some courage, her state of mind is deviated. She can barely be regarded as the third class. Whether she will be cultivated in the future depends on observation. After drawing 3 red circles, Yen Zai threw away the pen, stood up, and rubbed his stomach, muttering, working is really exhausting. Forget it, I'll go to Sir's place and have a bowl of rice, just one bowl, after Mu Hong went back, she tried her best to trick the Lord of the Wanli sect out. With the cooperation from both inside and outside, it didn't take much effort for Su Li to take over the sect. It was worth mentioning that the Lord of the Wanli sect was tough and refused to yield. Su Li could only make him a member of the Soul Tactics. When Mu Hong saw this scene, she became even more terrified. The thoughts in her mind had long been thrown out of her mind. With Mu Hong taking the lead, the remaining 10 people followed her example and tried their best to trick the lord of their sect. They even competed with each other in speed, for fear that they would be at a disadvantage because they were too slow. As for Nye Mingzhi, he was naturally in the hands of Dong Minglan and went to the place where he should go. Deputy Lord Nye has not returned since he went down the mountain. Now his soul tablet is broken. I am afraid that he has met with an accident. Zhuzhou region is in troubled times. Don't spread this matter to prevent accidents. Dong Minglan said cautiously. All the elders of the Liang sect nodded one after another. The Lord sighed in his heart, but he agreed on the surface, what Minglan said is right. The Zhuzhou region is in a precarious situation. We should integrate the fighting power of the sect in case of a sudden war. As soon as the words came out, Dong Minglan narrowed her eyes and nodded with a smile. Lord, you are farsighted. We will obey you. Seeing that the 2 big shots of the sect all nodded, the rest of the elders naturally did not dare to raise any objections and voted in favor. Your Excellency, it doesn't matter if you can't understand me now. I have chosen a clear path. From now on, you and I are in the same boat. Please take care of me. Hearing the transmitted sound from the woman beside him, the Lord closed his eyes and fell into complete silence. Since then, in just 8 months, Su Li had taken action 12 times. She completely eliminated the remaining stubborn forces and completely unified the 23 sects of the Zhuzhou region into a force. And Mu Hong finally knew that there were 19 sects that the new master had infiltrated. Even without their appearance, the new master would do this, but it would take a little more time. Look, Yen, I thought it would take 10 years, but it only took me 3 years to achieve this. Su Li sat by the lake in the back mountain and smiled like a flower. Hua Yen fiddled with the spiritual plant in her hand, looked up and smiled helplessly. She didn't speak. She was afraid that Su Li would be arrogant if she praised her. However, there was still unconcealable amazement in Hua Yan's eyes. Her bosom friend could always accomplish miracles that ordinary people could not imagine. When will we take action next? Su Li stopped smiling, and her dark eyes were dim. Don't worry. I will practice in isolation soon. Hua Yan was stunned, and then she smiled brightly. Her usual gentle tone revealed a rare murderous intent. The day you come out of isolation is the day we attack. Chapter 532. Book Maze Lu.org, wonderful pop-up window free reading. In a cave 100 meters underground in the depths of an unknown barren mountain in Zhuzhou region, it was so dull that it was difficult to breathe. Su Li glanced around at the seclusion retreat that she had opened up for half a day. Although she should not be disturbed when she practiced in the back mountain of Ni sect, she would never pin her hopes on the word should because of her cautious temperament. Without thinking too much, Su Li narrowed her beautiful eyes, and her eyes became sharp. She stretched out her right hand and drew a circle. Quietly, the azure blue luster crossed the dazzling trace along her fingertips, and the starry gate appeared again. Compared with the previous 2 times, Su Li's heart was extremely calm. This time, she was more prepared than ever. Her actual combat power had already exceeded her Jindan stage cultivation by 3 levels, and she also had several means to help her. If even she couldn't pass this threshold, then the cultivators who chose this path in ancient times would have died long ago. Don't be careless. Even a lion fights a rabbit with all its strength. I don't need to remind you that you have grown to this level. Suli nodded gently and took off the treasures such as Black Lotus ring. She said in a rare serious tone, "Take care of the guys in Songlei's cave. I will be back soon." Black Lotus rolled his eyes as a response. Suli smiled slightly, and without hesitation, she turned around and disappeared into the starry gate. It was cold rain in the early morning on the long street of Yunjing. The cold rain fell on Suli's dazed face, which made her shiver involuntarily. Then she came to her senses. Suli struggled to climb up from the collapsed and broken wall. She saw the familiar low bluish-gray brick wall, the dilapidated courtyard, the bright bloodstains on the grass, and the approaching figure. Her pupils suddenly shrank. You can still keep so calm in the face of death. You do have some skills. No wonder the young master will be fascinated by you and fall in love with you. Ling Xian, who was supposed to die, walked out gracefully, and her tone was as familiar as ever. This unforgettable familiar scene had long been engraved in her soul. Even if she already knew that everything was an illusion, she could not erase it. It was on this day that her life had undergone earth-shaking changes. I clearly entered the starry gate. Why do you want me to see these? Could it be that the Chuangxing path this time is an inner demon? Suli thought gloomily. Ling Xian had approached. The fourth elder of the Yinma cult should appear next, and then Su Yuk should appear. However, what happened next was far beyond her imagination. Stop, Ling Xian. Along with a furious roar, a figure at the end of the long street approached from afar. In a few flashes, he had arrived. Ling Li picked up the petite girl who was as light as a feather and held her tightly in his arms. His spiritual power poured into her body as if it was free. He always had a gentle face, but the anxiety in his eyes could burn through the sky. Sect Master. The fourth elder walked over and was stunned. What's going on? He looked at Ling Xian inquiringly. However, Ling Xian, who was aggressive just now, was avoiding his eyes. It seemed that she wanted to leave. The fourth elder was no fool, and he immediately understood what was going on. His gaze turned cold, and he moved his feet, faintly sealing off the ladder's movements. It's my carelessness. Looking at the girl who seemed to have fainted in his arms, Ling Li's eyes were full of self-blame. After confirming that Su Li's life was not in danger, he raised his head and looked at Ling Xian. His face instantly became cold, and his lips were like a thin piece of paper, like a cold blade. You are very good. Ling Xian took a deep breath and said righteously, I did it for the young master. You are the chosen one. How noble you are. How can you marry such a commoner? That's simply tarnishing you. Ling Mo, slap her. Slap. Ling Mo withdrew his hand expressionlessly. Looking at Ling Xian's astonished face, he said lightly, You stink. The stench of jealousy could even be smelled by him. Ling Xian's face turned pale, and her lips trembled. She stared at Ling Li and wanted to say something, but finally, she said nothing and left in a panic. Child. Ling Mo walked to Ling Li and asked him. The meaning in his eyes was self-evident. Ling Li closed his eyes and felt the softness in his arms. He was more and more angry, but his mind was extremely sober. He said calmly, Fourth Elder, do you know your crime? At this moment, Fourth Elder had received the sound transmitted by Third Elder, and he was extremely regretful. Hearing Ling Li's words, he immediately lowered his head. I listened to the holy girl's lies, and I know my crime. Then, the holy girl Ling Xian tried to kill Madam Hierarch but failed. She has committed a heinous crime. You will be responsible for hunting her down, regardless of life or death. Fourth Elder was shocked. He looked up and saw the soberness and firmness in Ling Li's eyes. He thought of the sound transmitted by Third Elder and made up his mind. Yes, sir. In the east courtyard of the Ling mansion, there were all kinds of holy things for healing injuries in the large and exquisite wing room. I really can't eat anymore. On the bed, Su Li leaned on the porcelain pillow and reluctantly pushed away the tonic sent to her mouth. But Ling Li pulled a long face and was stubborn like a smelly and hard stone. No. You haven't recovered yet. Doctors don't treat themselves. You have to listen to me. Su Li's eyes softened, and she finally picked up the soup and drank it. Ling Li's face became better, and the love in his eyes almost melted. He said softly, "Good girl, I will deal with the chores of the cult, and I will come to accompany you soon." Su Li nodded. Ling Li helped her lie down, and then he left reluctantly. The room was quiet again. Su Li was silent for a moment in front of the pink gauze curtain above her head. Then she reluctantly sat up, opened the lining, and gently pressed the scab wound. Hiss, the pain came to her nerves. Su Li took a light breath, and her eyes were full of self-mockery. What is this? The other possibility of time may be better. Then what will happen when this world is broken? Su Li pondered. She stayed in the Ling mansion for 2 months for healing. In addition to dealing with the arrival of Lord Rue, Su Yu and others, she gained something. According to what Black Lotus said, although the test of Chuangxing Path is difficult, it is not difficult for me. But I haven't found a way to break the deadlock so far. It is likely that something unexpected happened in Chuangxing Path. Everything that has happened in the past 2 months feels like it's real. It's like there really is such a branch of time, and I'm like I've taken over another branch of time to exist, and I still have my original memories. So, if I stay here, what will happen? What will be the final ending of me in this branch of time? Countless thoughts flashed through her mind, and she finally quieted down. Without the fateful twist, everything in this branch of time was developing in a good direction. Su Li thought for a long time and did not touch those who had life rings. In this timeline, she should not know such things as life rings. The consciousness in Mei Ruhan's mind was also deliberately ignored by her. She wanted to see how far the test of Chuangxing Path could go. With the secret help of the Linli building, the Yinma cult soon controlled nearly 80% of the forces of Dahan. The Dongfang family was a mere figurehead. With the help of the Wanjian sect, the Dongfang family in the spiritual circle could not play a big role. Finally, after weighing the gains and losses, the Yinma cult gave up the arrangement of the Dongfang family. As a result, Dahan finally came to the end. The change of dynasty. Ling Li, the useless third son of the Ling family, turned out to be the hierarch of the Yinma cult. He ascended the throne and changed the name of the country to Ling. Su Li, the owner of the Linli building, had great foresight and unparalleled wisdom. She was conferred the title of Empress Su, the motherly model of the world. The world was shocked. The whole secular world and the martial arts circle were in shock for several years. The light in Fang Yuan's eyes also completely dimmed in these years, leaving only a faint warmth. It's good that I can help you manage the Linli building. In the Linli building, Fang Yuan held a glass of wine and looked at the towering palace in the city center. He smiled bitterly. In Chusho Palace, Su Li, wearing a phoenix crown, was bright and charming. She held a brush in her hand and wrote a word on the rice paper. 6. Mammy Li was confused. She still used the previous title, Miss, what does it mean? Su Li closed her eyes and didn't say anything. She had been in this tributary of time for nearly 6 years. In the first few years, she acted according to her original temperament, and everything ran normally. But in order to make things go smoothly, she couldn't hold back and predicted the future several times. It also included that she frightened Jing Axean with words, so that she took the initiative to take action and fooled the existence of the outside world. But in the end, the truth could not be concealed. A false idea filled her mind. Even if she was paralyzed for 6 years, she was still sober, even more sober than ever. In the past 2 years, although she tried her best to cover it up, the premonition that the truth would be revealed became stronger. Li, why are you in a daze again? What are you thinking about? Ling Li, dressed in a dragon robe, strode with a smile. On his handsome face, he had sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He slightly raised the corners of his mouth, exuding high spirits. In these years, he stayed with Su Li, but the love in his heart did not fade away. Instead, it became purer and purer like wine. There was no room for any other woman in his eyes. Su Li raised her head. At this moment, suddenly, boom! There was a loud explosion in the sky, as if bombarding on everyone's mind. Then Su Li felt a heat on her wrist, and the life ring, which had been lurking and motionless, lit up. She raised her head and saw Ling Li, who was full of astonishment, quickly faded away. She also heard the majestic words. The time is up. The trial is over. Come out. As soon as the voice fell, Su Li felt that the memory in her mind began to fade. The misery of the first life and the glory of the second life disappeared one after another. Su Li pursed her lips. Even if I have worked hard for 6 years, my memory will disappear after I go out. It seems that I will continue to be a slaughtered animal. While talking to herself, she laughed in a low voice. After all, it's just an illusion. After all, I still can't escape the old way of being used. So, it's not a bad thing to break the life ring in advance and put myself in a desperate situation. Su Li raised her head and stared at the sky, as if she was looking at the unknown existence again. I have seen enough. Crash. The sky suddenly broke. Chapter 533. 34 Chinese Net, in 1 second wonderful pop-up window free reading. Even though the Hall of the Holy Girl had not been open for nearly 1,000 years, the air was still not dull and exuded a faint fragrance. In the large quiet room, Su Li opened her eyes and looked down at the familiar white dress. The reincarnation mirror lay quietly in her hand, which was cold to the touch. Because of the role of the life ring, her memory should go back to before she entered the reincarnation mirror. But there seemed to be some accident, and her soul hidden in the depths was still very sober. Although the illusion of Chuangxing Path is very real, it can't affect me. Su Li looked at the details of the reincarnation mirror in her hand, which was the same as in her memory, that is to say, the dangerous test for me is actually too simple. Li. Suddenly, the door of the Hall of the Holy Girl was pushed open on both sides, and a weak figure hurried in. There was anxiety in the gentle female voice. Su Li raised her head and saw a pair of eyes full of worry and distress. She was pleasantly surprised, and her face became gentle. She called softly, Master. Li. Mo Qin shouted with pity. She came to kneel down and buried Su Li in her chest. Her voice was choked with sobs. It's over. Everything is over. As your master, I'm sorry. Su Li leaned quietly in the arms of the woman, and her eyes were gentle. She sighed softly, Master, I also want to spend more time with you, but there is not enough time. Li, what are you talking about? Mo Qin was stunned and held Su Li's face. Those strong enemies no longer force us. What do you mean there is not enough time? Are you hurt? Let me see. Mo Qin's face changed slightly, and she became anxious, but was pushed away by Su Li. Everything you demonstrate now is just what I want to see, so, all you can do is steal the picture in my memory and outline a false picture. It's too low level. Su Li's words were sarcastic, but Imo-chin was more and more confused, and her tone became more anxious and worried. You little girl, what nonsense are you talking about? Everything is true. You have come out of the suffering reincarnation mirror. You are now the Yushu holy girl. You are the first senior of the young generation of Yushu sect. It doesn't matter if you want to continue lying to me. Su Li smiled slightly. Since the foundation of this world is my belief, then I only need to deceive myself. She stretched out her hand and pointed to Imo-chin's stunned face. Imo-chin, there are countless spies in Jojo region. You have been lurking around me and observing me. Which holy sect are you from? Imo-chin was stunned. Su Li increased the suspicion in her heart and narrowed her eyes. Let me think about it. Those who can be with me must be at least one of the 4 holy sects, right? Coupled with the fact that he was a lackey of the Fate ancestor, it would be even easier to screen. Do I need to explain? My dear master. Imo-chin took a few steps back, and her face kept changing. Finally, she was completely gloomy inside. Su Li, isn't it good to live a muddled life? If it's what you want, then it's not good. Su Li smiled brightly, with bright eyes and white teeth. Holy sects, Fate ancestor, all of you deserve to die. Buzz, the picture in front of her fluctuated for a moment and then returned to stability. Imo-chin's face became cold, self-consciousness awakened again. How troublesome. Looks like I can only brainwash them again. She reached out to grab Su Li. Her cultivation was far beyond that of ordinary practitioners in Jindan realm. Su Li tilted her head and smiled, whispering, now, I am the strongest in Qingshui circle. Boom! Imo-chin mixed with the fragments of the main hall and shot backward, smashing a large group of palaces. Yushu sect was in chaos in an instant. Fragments. Su Li flashed out of the fragments of the palace. Looking at the chaotic picture, her smile became more and more intense. If I think it really exists, then it is true. Now my cultivation can only be resisted by Fate ancestor. I slaughtered the 25 sects in Jojo region, including the immortal cultivation sect. I killed all the holy sects in Qingshui circle, and blood flowed like a river. Lives were plunged into misery and suffering. Even the 4 peak holy sects were no match for me. Now, Xinglu, you evolve a Fate ancestor for me. Let me see what kind of monster the Fate ancestor is. As Su Li finished her words, the picture turned faster and faster. In the end, it finally couldn't keep up with the speed of Su Li's weaving and turned into chaos. Enough, stop. The deafening majestic voice bombarded Su Li's mind. Immediately, the chaos in front of her receded and turned into clarity. What entered his eyes was a familiar starry sky, as well as a graceful pink-clothed woman with a blurry face sitting on a throne. Su Li looked over. The corner of the lips under the veil of the glamorous woman seemed to move a little, and the voice sounded again. To be able to pass my test at such a young age. You, not bad. What's your name? Junior is just a nobody. My name is not worth mentioning. Senior is too kind. Su Li's eyes flashed, and she replied in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. The term Star Hall flashed in her memory. She didn't forget the last encounter in Star Hall. The admiration in the cold and elegant woman's eyes became more and more intense. In order to annoy her sworn enemy Yi Chushue, she casually arranged a killing trap for Su Li. Unexpectedly, she not only failed to kill the girl, but also let her get out of trouble in just 6 years, which really surprised her. Because of this, she took the test token from her subordinates and came to Star Path to see Su Li in person. Yi Chushue appreciated this girl, and it was not without reason. No wonder she took action personally last time. However, this time I robbed her. The cold and elegant woman narrowed her eyes and thought. She deliberately omitted the danger of the test and said in a rare gentle tone, "Are you willing to be my disciple?" Suli showed a puzzled look in time. "Senior is." The cold and elegant woman chuckled softly. "Do you still remember the danger you encountered in Star Hall last time? If I didn't help you, you wouldn't be able to get to the present so easily." Suli suddenly realized, and said in surprise, "It turns out to be Senior Star Hall." She deliberately flattered, but her heart was cold. Although the last contact with the woman from Star Hall was extremely short, she was definitely not the same person as the cold and elegant woman she saw today. This woman would never expect that the woman from Star Hall not only saved her last time, but also answered her questions and had a short communication. This person pretended to be that female senior. Is it because she likes me and wants to take me as her disciple in advance? Suli's thoughts flashed, but she had a premonition that it was absolutely not like this. The test of Star Path didn't leave a way out at all. If she hadn't been strangely able to keep sober all the time, she would definitely be lost in it. But even if she could keep the advantage, it still took her 6 years to break through. This person is malicious. Suli's eyes were slightly fixed, but she didn't show it on the surface. She said respectfully, "Senior, can you answer my doubts? What is Star Hall? Last time I had a glimpse of it, it really made me confused. What's so difficult about it?" The cold and elegant woman saw that Suli didn't seem to notice the trick at all. When she thought of the future when she met Yi Chushue, she felt a burst of joy in her heart. She said directly, "As long as you take me as your disciple, one day you will find that the so-called Qingshui circle is just a backwater place. There are many ignorant people." Suli had been in contact with Chimo's circle, so she naturally knew the truth that there was always someone better than her. But she still pretended to be shocked and didn't understand anything to attract the cold and elegant woman to continue talking. Star Hall is a big force in the starry sky. It is above many cultivation worlds. You should know that the starry sky and eternity are the ultimate pursuit of practitioners. You are like a frog at the bottom of a well, only in a small world. How dare you call yourself a practitioner? The cold and elegant woman snorted coldly, and her tone became gentle again. "So, if you take me as your disciple, you will reach the sky in one step and enter the big force in the starry sky. From then on, you will get rid of the low-level struggle and have the qualification to strive for a higher goal. Why not?" "Senior, you are right." Suli's eyes were full of excitement and yearning. "I am willing to take you as my teacher." Ha 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 ha. When the cold and elegant woman heard this, she finally couldn't help laughing out loud. "Good. Little girl, congratulations on making the best choice in your life." After that, she made a gesture, and a palm-sized jade box appeared from the starry sky and flew into Suli's hand. "This is the elixir and mental method I prepared for you. Due to the rules of the star path, I can't give you too much, but these are enough for you to practice to the realm of human immortals. When you step into the realm of human immortals, you can break the nothingness and pinch this method. I will only send someone to pick you up." Suli took the jade box with both hands and lowered her head. Her voice was full of surprise and joy. "I will follow your instructions, Master." "Ha ha ha, very good. I look forward to your arrival." The cold and elegant woman waved her sleeves and disappeared in the star path. Soon after, the star gate appeared. Suli took a deep look at the direction where the cold and elegant woman disappeared, and the expression on her face instantly disappeared. She put away the jade box and stepped into the star gate without stopping. Deep in the ground, the star gate flashed, and Suli's figure reappeared. Black Lotus Ring, who had completely given up hope, suddenly quivered and shot out of the soil, falling into Suli's hand. "Suli, you are still alive. Do you know how long it has been?" 6 years. A whole 6 years. I almost went to find the next master. Suli frowned and pressed Black Lotus back into the ring space. She said coldly, "Don't talk nonsense. Is there any accident in the arrangement of Jojo region?" Black Lotus calmed down a little and felt that the force above his head was less. He came out and shook his head. For a practitioner, 6 years is nothing. Fortunately, you didn't mention the time of practicing in isolation. Everything in NI's sect is normal. Suli breathed a sigh of relief and immediately told Black Lotus about her encounter on the Chuangxing path. Black Lotus was instantly stunned. This. There really is a star hole. You knew it last time, but you didn't tell me. Black Lotus was very sad and indignant. He was silent for a moment and said, "However, I always feel something is wrong. Do you really want to learn the practice method of the star hole? Just for a while." Suli sealed the jade box and put it into the universe ring. She said with a faint smile, "How can I practice something of unknown origin?" Chapter 534. In the vast and borderless beautiful mountains and rivers, there was only a pink palace dotted among them. In the huge hall, the pink gauze curtain fluttered in the wind, and the smooth and clean ground was like a mirror, reflecting another world. On a soft chair covered with pure white fur, a woman in a pink gauze dress was lying lazily. Her eyes were half closed, and her breasts were half exposed. She was humming softly, and she was in a very good mood. At her feet, a handsome young man in a pink robe was carefully massaging her toes with a focused look. After a while, he raised his eyes and said in a serious tone, "Master, do you really want to accept that ignorant female practitioner from the small world as an apprentice?" The woman half opened her eyes, and there seemed to be a pink mist rippling in her eyes. In the eyes of the pink-robed young man, it became a soul-stirring beauty. She snorted softly and said with a smile, "How could I like that little girl? She is the person that Yichushua likes." "I'm disgusted." The sense of crisis in the eyes of the pink-robed young man faded away, and he smiled a little more. Then he asked in confusion, "Then you clearly gave her the mental method elixir. Who said that was the mental method elixir?" The woman's tone turned cold. "That's just a trick I left. If that little girl really has the ability to come to me, I'm afraid that she has become half a puppet of mine unknowingly. If I ask her to die, she won't even blink. At that time, I must humiliate Yichushua once." Speaking of this, the woman smiled again. "That scene, just thinking about it makes me happy." The pink-robed young man also laughed when he heard the words, "Master, no matter how angry Yichushua is, she will definitely not dare to do it." The woman snorted proudly, "Of course, this is my bedroom. Even if she was promoted by Master Hong Luo and became the deputy hall master, the rules of the Star Hall still have to be followed." Before she finished her words, her face suddenly changed. Boom! Without warning, a sword light brighter than the starlight fell into the center of the pink palace like a meteorite. Accompanied by the screams of many male servants, the pink palace's restriction runes didn't stop it even for a moment. In the blink of an eye, it became a ruin under the impact of the sword light. The arc-shaped shock wave spread, the wind raged in the mountains and forests, and countless trees collapsed. One sword destroyed the palace. A figure flashed, and the woman in white suddenly appeared in the void. She held a sword in one hand and slowly descended. Her blue eyes were like ice that could not be melted. "Shinchunshue, get out here." Whoosh! The pink figure instantly shot out from the ruins, followed by the huge pink skull behind her. In the blink of an eye, the sky was illuminated pink. "You destroyed my palace and killed my concubine. Ye! First Snow! I'll tear you to shreds." Yi Chushua's blue eyes with sword light suddenly become serious. She doesn't step back but uses her sword to block. The skeleton magic weapon and the flying sword have collided for thousands of times in the blink of an eye. The shock wave brought by the collision soon sweeps away the beautiful mountains and rivers into bare barren hills. Shin Chunshui became more and more anxious. He spread his fingers and a pink skeleton zither appeared out of thin air. Seeing this, Yi Chushua frowned. She let go of the sword in her hand and let it return to her body automatically. Another icy giant sword slowly rose from behind. Shin Chunshui, you hurt my concubine, and I destroyed your palace. Now we are even. Yi Chushua's tone was calm, without the tension before the war. You have to think about the consequences of using the forbidden weapon in the star hole. Shin Chunshui's pink eyes were full of anger and madness. Yi Chushue. Only you are allowed to disturb my meditation, but I am not allowed to hurt you. There is no such rule in this world. She flicked her 2 fingers, and the skeleton zither in her hand made a series of strange sounds. Even if I am punished to go to the small world, I will seriously injure you today. 10,000 years. You are so stubborn. Yi Chushue shook her head. The giant sword behind her was shining with blue light. There was pity in her eyes. Even if the grade of your forbidden weapon is higher than mine, it depends on who uses it. Ah! Shin Chunshui was poked at his sore point, and he was almost crazy with anger. Yi Chushue, I will tear your mouth. She pressed her 10 fingers on the strings of the zither and flicked her fingers. The skull at the top immediately opened its mouth, protruding countless colorful arcs. Just looking at it would make people sink into it and be disturbed by countless inner demons and distracting thoughts. As the attack approached, Yi Chushue closed her eyes and suddenly opened them. 2 transparent sword lights slashed through in an instant, cutting off more than half of those silk threads in the blink of an eye. Qingming sky. She shouted softly, and the wind and clouds in the sky changed. The starry sky became a world full of small ice blue swords. Almost at the same time, Shin Chunshui gnashed his teeth angrily. 3,000 pink swords. Countless skeletons flooded over, resisting the encirclement of the small ice blue swords, occupying half of the sky. Kill them. The skeletons turned into residual shadows and rushed over. They opened their mouths ferociously and bit the small swords one by one. Yi Chushue's eyes flashed, and thousands of small swords also turned into sword lights and shot out. Just the 2 of them actually fought with the intensity of tens of thousands of people. The aftermath of the continuous sweeping in the void thinned the foundation again, and finally, boom. The ground sank, and the sky fell and the earth cracked. Shin Chunshui and Yi Chushue were both deputy lords of the Star Hole. Neither of them could do anything to the other. The battle didn't last long. Finally, a lord came out of isolation and forced a stop. But the storm spread for a long time before it stopped. Until Shin Chunshui was sent to guard the Dingfeng Star Zone and Yi Chushue returned to the Star Hall area, no one mentioned it again. In the end, Sister Hong Luo has won this game of chess. Yi Chushue returned to her own bedroom. Seeing the red figure in the spiritual realm, her tense expression suddenly relaxed. The beautiful figure in the spiritual realm let out a faint smile, but did not turn around. Fortunately, you got the test token this time. It proves that you first contacted the junior in the small world, so you won slightly. Shin Chunshui is temporarily exiled. You can concentrate on improving your strength. Don't be careless. Beichen's people will not give up. I understand. Yi Chushue nodded and sighed. It's a pity that the junior was implicated by me. With Shin Chunshui's mind, he must have left some means. I hope she can be blessed. The beautiful figure in the mirror was silent for a moment and said, there are so many small worlds. You only have a mark of the star path. If you want to find that girl in a short time, even I can't do it. This matter can only depend on her own luck. We can't help her. Yi Chushu understood this, and couldn't help but sigh again. After Su Li came out of isolation, she returned to Ni's sect to meet Hua Yan and others, and then she isolated again. This time, the isolation only lasted for 3 days. 3 days later, Su Li sat in the quiet room and looked inside her pubic region. On the 18th grade black lotus, Su Li sat in it in the shape of a baby. She looked solemn, but under the black wrapping, she looked a bit evil. Yuaning realm. This is a realm that I didn't reach in my last life. Su Li saw the gurgling power of Yuaning in her body, with the unique jade-like feeling of Suiyu tactics. The gray film buried under the surface of the skin seemed to have thickened to the thickness of a hair. The total amount had increased, and the area that could be covered was also larger. How much strength can the new gray film make me exert without being discovered by the natural law needs new experiments. Coincidentally, Su Bai hasn't eaten for a long time. My physical body hasn't changed. It seems that my realm is low. The breakthrough of the immortal realm has no effect on my physical body. The evil ghost has a new change, which is related to the Black Lotus. I still need to explore it. All kinds of thoughts flashed in her mind, and Su Li got up and opened the door. Hua Yan, Yen Zai, Lvu, Dongfang Wuxue and others were all there. Su Li slightly tilted her chin, showing a bright smile. Everyone, let's go. After this, Zhuzhou region will be our world. The bluestone was covered with thick moss, which was slippery when walking on it. Her nose was full of the smell of wet grass. Su Li looked up and saw the familiar mountain gate. She raised her lips and stepped up. The plan had been made 10 years ago. In the past 10 years, she just gathered everyone's efforts to improve the framework. When it was finally implemented, she was very idle. The first step was to launch all the secret forces and temporarily pinch the eyes of all the holy sections. The spies of the holy sects had long been transparent in the eyes of the lords. In the past, they just didn't touch them for the sake of the face of the holy sections. Now they had a new master, who was absolutely powerful and overbearing. Naturally, they had to obey the master's orders. After the first step, the 23 sects used all the secret forces to infiltrate into Zihan's sect and Yushu's sect at the same time, and temporarily controlled all the people who were suspected to be the spies of the holy sects. After 2 steps, the 23 sects had a short blank period. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the 23 sects, which had been prepared for a long time, were divided into 2 groups and attacked the 2 sects at the same time. The Immortal Cultivation sect divided the ghosts into 2 groups, and each group went to help the 2 sects. Many ants could bite an elephant to death. A sect faced the old guys of 12 sects at the same time. Even if it had a deep foundation, it couldn't bear it at all, not to mention the existence of ghosts, which was incomprehensible to practitioners. Therefore, the 2 sects were stunned by the sudden invasion. They only held on for 2 days, and were on the verge of being breached. What's going on? Who can tell me why the 23 sects attacked our Yushu sect and Zihan sect at the same time? In the last line of defense, the eyes of Yao Shuangya, the current lord of Yushu sect, were red, and most of his soft black hair turned white in 2 nights. The atmosphere in the whole hall was tense, like a string that was about to break. It's not a big deal if a strong enemy attacks. Our Yushu sect has prepared for a rainy day and prepared a lot of records. But every time we counterattack, the rout is calculated, and we are completely annihilated. The sect is so shaky. Who is adding insult to injury? Who is the mole? The whole hall was silent. Many elders looked at each other, and they were all at a loss. They were elders who had stayed in Yushu's sect for more than 1,000 years. How could they be the mole? Lord, the people in the sect are shaken now. It's not the time to talk about this. Lihai, the deputy lord, stood up and said. Yao Shuangya took a deep breath and barely calmed down. You are right. We should be more united in the face of the enemy. But the 12 sects joined forces, and the old ancestor was seriously injured. The spies we sent to seek help from the holy sects have no news. What should we do now? Everyone's heart sank, and they fell into a long silence. Maybe we can make a deal with the immortal tea tree to unlock its seal. Someone suggested, and then the hall fell into a longer silence. The demon tree looked kind on the surface, but it was actually sealed here by the founder. If the seal was really unlocked, no one knew if the demon tree would turn against them and turn to deal with them. Mo Qin stood among many elders of alchemy, but there was not much sadness in her heart. Maybe this is retribution. She thought in her heart. Chapter 535. At this point, we have no choice. Li Hai looked dignified. He looked at Yao Shuangya and said solemnly, Lord. We can't resist the joint forces of the 12 sections. We can only rely on external forces. If we don't use the trump card of Immortal Tea Plant, you are the only one left to wake up Grand Elder. Impossible. Yao Shuangya interrupted Li Hai's words with a gloomy look. Grand Elder is at a critical moment, which is related to the rise of our sect. We must not disturb him. As soon as these words came out, many elders were worried at the same time. What should we do? The elder in charge of the supply of spiritual stones looked worried. Even if the tactical matrix for protecting the sect shrinks to the extreme, it can only last for half a day. Can we only surrender? Yao Shuangya saw that people were unstable. Even if his heart was as heavy as a mountain, he still looked calm and his tone was steady. Our Yushu sect has stood for thousands of years. How can it be defeated by a group of mobs? The war is inevitable. You wait to recuperate first. At that time, I will have a way to deal with the combat power of Grand Elder. Hearing Yao Shuangya's words, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and said in unison, Lord is wise. However, no one knew how many people actually believed it. I'll take someone to check the tactical matrix. Li Hai's eyes flashed, and he retreated. Deputy Lord Li, wait. I'll go with you. The elder in charge of the supply of spiritual stones hurriedly followed him out of the hole. Seeing this, the Lord looked slightly relaxed. At the critical moment, there were still people in the sect who could be relied on. However, when he thought of Grand Elder, his mood was gloomy again. Over the years, others didn't know why Yushu's sect was strong, but he knew it as the Lord. Grand Elder had disappeared as early as more than 2,000 years ago. If he hadn't climbed up the holy sects in time, Yushu's sect would have been swallowed by Sihan's sect. How could it still maintain prosperity? All the spies of the holy sects have been removed, and even the elder in charge of contacting the holy sects has disappeared. Who on earth is so generous? Yao Shuangya calculated. Facing the unknown enemy, he felt more and more powerless. Unconsciously, he came to a palace. Looking up at the words, Holy Girl Hall, he felt inexplicably cold. Bad luck, Yao Shuangya's face darkened. He waved his sleeves, turned around, and left. This scene clearly fell into the eyes of Fong Ling, who was sitting upright in the hall, her expression as usual. After the chaos 1,000 years ago, the position of the holy girl of Yushu's sect had long been regarded as a jinx. If it were not for the order of holy sects that the holy girl was required to preside over the necessary rituals, the position of the holy girl would have been revoked long ago. After she came back from that world, although she took over senior sister apprentice May's class, she was also suspected of being a soul snatcher, so she was always guarded against by the master and the lord. This situation became more obvious after she saved Mei Ruhan. However, she didn't care. Atonement, there might be another way now. Fong Ling whispered to herself. She took out an old embroidery from her arms, which was almost falling apart. There were 2 characters, Linli, on it. She could still remember that carefree self of hers. That kind of simple busyness was a kind of warmth and happiness that she had never experienced before. How great would it be if everything in that world was real? Fong Ling sighed and closed her eyes. She didn't have much time to rest. Yao Shuangya walked out of the main hall and looked up at the huge and endless spiritual power impact outside the seemingly indestructible tactical matrix for protecting the sect. He quickly withdrew his gaze and turned to walk into the back mountain. In front of an ancient palace, he stopped and pondered for a moment. He called softly, "Old ancestor." The palace was silent for a moment, and there was an old cough. Ahem. Come in. Yao Shuangya didn't expect that the old ancestor would really respond to him. He was slightly happy at the moment, and pushed the door into the hall. The curtains on all sides of the palace were closed, and only a few spiritual lamps lit up a few areas. The sight suddenly dimmed. Yao Shuangya came to the quiet room where the old ancestor usually practiced in isolation. Seeing the door open, he immediately walked in. The old ancestor, who usually had white hair and a ruddy face, now had a wrinkled face and a thin figure. There was a little blood on the chest of his snow-white robe, like plum blossoms. Yao Shuangya thought that his injury should be better after the old ancestor called him in, but he didn't expect it to be more serious. He was shocked immediately. "Old ancestor. You. Ahem. I'm not dead yet. What are you shouting for?" Immortal Yushu Ding Yan's eyes were gloomy, and he couldn't help but cover his mouth and cough twice. The cultivation of the old ancestors of the 12 sects is a little lower than mine. But I'm not weaker than them. I just hate the weird ghost that greatly reduces my strength. Otherwise, how can I be like this? I'm afraid that's the means of the person in the dark. Yao Shuangya's tone was a little weak. It's easy to dodge a spear in the open, but difficult to guard against a stab in the dark. Who ever thought that there would be someone who could unify the power of the 23 sects? The enemy is aggressive and well prepared. How should we deal with it? You and I both know that Grand Elder is not in the sect. Ding Yan paused, and his voice was low. The name of Immortal Yushu is passed on to me. Yushu's sect must not be destroyed in my hands. You come with me to see the demon tree Bizhui. Do we really need to rely on the old monster Bizhui? Yao Shuangya was shocked, but he didn't say anything. He obediently flew out of the palace with Ding Yan and landed in front of the demon tree of Tea Tree Mount. In the process of flying, Ding Yan's dry face quickly filled up and changed to the original childish appearance. His sluggish pneuma also temporarily recovered, but the blood on his chest was not erased. Yao Shuangya breathed a sigh of relief. The old ancestor is not confused. He is still guarding against Bizhui. Senior Bizhui, please show up. Ding Yan spoke with full of vigor, and his voice spread far between the cliffs. Boom, the giant tree swayed, and soon Bizhui's old face appeared on the thick roots. It turns out to be Ding Yan. After you took over the title of Immortal Yushu, you have never looked for me. Why are you here today? Although Bizhui was being sarcastic, his tone was not bad. Ding Yan was slightly relieved and said in a deep voice, Senior, are you willing to make a deal with me? Bizhui let out a faint smile. Let's hear it. Ding Yan held his fists and said in a low voice, Yushu's sect is about to be destroyed. Senior, it's impossible that you don't know it. After the big tactical matrix for protecting the sect is broken, you will be trapped here. I'm afraid it's hard to protect yourself, right? Hee hee. Bijue's tone turned cold. Your Yushu sect knows why I am trapped. Why do you come here to laugh at me? Senior, you misunderstood me. Ding Yan's attitude was extremely humble as he hurriedly explained, I came here this time to help Senior undo the seal. Ha 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 ha. Bizhui laughed, there is no free lunch in the world. Ding Yan, do you want me to fight for your sect? That's impossible. Even if I am trapped here, I will never help you deal with the enemy. Yao Shuangya was shocked and angry, but Ding Yan was not surprised at all. He continued to lower his posture, Senior, the 12 sects have joined hands. Even if you are willing to help, it will be useless. I want you to help me conveniently. There will be no danger. Oh. A trace of interest appeared on Bijue's old face. What? You want us to escape? Mo Qin was called to the side hall alone and looked at Li Hai, who came to deliver the message. How can we escape? Aren't we trapped in the big tactical matrix for protecting the sect? It's the demonic tree. Li Hai's voice was as calm as ever. Old Ancestor made an agreement with Bizhui to set him free. Bizhui will evacuate with the elites of the sect and go to other big regions to start anew. I see. Mo Qin smiled bitterly. It was really Ding Yan's usual style. Suddenly, she remembered one thing. Seeing that Li Hai had not left, she quickly asked, how many people is he going to take away? Li Hai looked at Mo Qin and did not speak. Mo Qin's heart was cold. Xiaoliang and Shaoqin, Bei Xiaoliang is now the first genius of the younger generation of our sect. Naturally, he will not be abandoned. It is Qi Qin who will be abandoned. Li Hai said regretfully, the demonic tree is only willing to take away 100 people. If we start anew, we must have an alchemist. Old Ancestor doesn't even want to take you. How come? Mo Qin fell to the ground in a daze. She had already abandoned a disciple. Now she wanted her to abandon the second one. Li Hai stood in place and did not leave. After a long time, Mo Qin suddenly raised her head, stared at the person in front of her, and slowly said 2 words. Li Hai. There was a smile on Li Hai's cold face. Perhaps because he hadn't smiled for a long time, his smile was extremely ugly. You haven't called my name for a long time. Mo Qin shook her head, I know my level of alchemy. In terms of importance, it is not enough to enter the top 100 of the sect. Did you say something to Yao Shuangya? Being exposed, Li Hai was silent for a while and said, I don't want you to die. Mo Qin smiled in a low voice, raised her head, and her eyes seemed to light up. Take Qi Qin with you, I will stay. Li Hai was immediately shocked. You should be able to understand me. Mo Qin walked to Li Hai, and her tone was as calm as death. You know better than anyone how I have lived in the past 1,000 years. I want to go down to accompany her. Mo Qin's eyes softened. That girl must be very lonely down there alone. That's not your fault. Li Hai's eyes flashed with pain. None of us can save her, do you understand? So, I was wrong from the beginning. The better I treat her, the more I hurt her. Mo Qin closed her eyes. Don't worry about me anymore, Deputy Lordly, whoosh. Li Hai pointed at Mo Qin's sleeping acupuncture point. Looking at the person who fell softly in his arms, his cold eyebrows frowned together, and then became flat after a while. What? You want to stay? Yao Shuangya looked at the cold man in front of him in amazement. Li Hai, this is not like you. In his impression, Li Hai never did anything without benefits, let alone self-sacrifice. Did he take the wrong medicine this time? There must be someone to sacrifice. If there is no high-level person to stay, the sect will fall apart too fast. I'm afraid that you won't even have time to escape. Li Hai's voice was dull, as if he was not sacrificed in his words. Yao Shuangya's face changed slightly when he heard the words, and then he felt a sense of sympathy. You can always convince me easily. If it weren't for this disaster, maybe the next lord of Yushu's sect would be you. It's useless to say more. You should get ready quickly. Qi Chen will take my place. He is a good seedling. Okay. Yao Shuangya didn't think much, and quickly left to cooperate with Bizhui. Everything was done in secret. Li Hai looked back and saw thousands of ignorant disciples who were still maintaining the operation of the tactical matrix distributed among the mountains, and his eyes flashed with self-mockery. I still lost to you, Qin. Chapter 536. On the verge of extinction, Yushu's sect's efficiency was extremely high. After deciding on the seed candidates, only an hour later, everyone was summoned to a dim hole. Ahem, Ding Yan opened his eyes and looked at Li Hai. Although his pupils were old and turbid, they seemed to be able to see through everything. Then, his old voice sounded from the latter's awareness sea. Compared with Yao Shuangya, I appreciate you more. Do you really want to stay for a woman? Li Hai tightened his arms around Mo Qin, pursed his lips, and did not respond. Forget it. The appreciation in Ding Yan's eyes faded and was replaced by indifference. You should go out. Li Hai bowed his head and gestured, handing the unconscious person in his hand to Bei Xiao Liang and Qi Qin, who were standing not far away. He secretly transmitted the sound, without me in the future, take care of your master. Don't let me down. Deputy Lord Li, Qi Qin took over the master and called out in a bitter voice, but his voice was stuck in his throat. In such a desperate situation, even the old ancestor could only choose to escape. He wanted Li Hai to stay, but there was no way at all. Should it be so painful to be weak? Deputy Lord Li, you stay, I'll go out. Bei Xiao Liang's eyes were firm. Li Hai smiled, and his smile was as ugly as ever. Your master has lost your senior sister apprentice. I can't let her lose any more disciples. Live well, do you understand? Bei Xiao Liang lowered his head, didn't let himself look so embarrassed, and said softly, without you, master will be sad. Li Hai's whole body shook slightly, and then his smile became brilliant. That's the best sentence I've ever heard. After that, he patted Bei Xiao Liang's shoulder, and without stopping, he decisively turned and disappeared at the door of the hall. Bei Xiao Liang was startled and looked up suddenly, but he didn't see his back. His eyes suddenly dimmed, and his heart was drowned by the surging guilt and powerlessness. He always understood that his master was an alchemist with mediocre combat power. Without Li Hai's secret help, it was impossible for him to become so excellent. For him, what was the difference between Li Hai's status and that of his master? But now, Bei Xiao Liang's mind was in a mess, and he was silent. The hall was similarly terrifyingly quiet. The feeling of being forced to leave one's home was unpleasant to anyone. Even those who were naturally cold and indifferent couldn't help but reveal their displeasure. Ahem. You are all elites carefully selected by me. The important task of reinvigorating Yushu's sect will be handed over to you. Don't let me down. Li Hai covered his mouth, his face was abnormally red. He waved his hand and sent out a message. In the next moment, a jade-green vortex appeared out of thin air at the center of the hole. Shockingly, it was the teleportation entrance of the immortal Dao Tea tree. Time is running out. Let's all go in. We will leave the Zhuzhou region with the immortal tea plant. After we get out of the region, it depends on our own luck. After Ding Yan finished his words, Yao Shuangya immediately took the lead to enter the green whirlpool, and the elders who followed Yao Shuangya entered one after another. With them taking the lead, the rest of the people no longer hesitated and all entered the whirlpool. Bei Xiaoliang carried the unconscious Emo Qin on his back, looked at Qi Qin, and also stepped in. After everyone entered, Ding Yan also stepped into the whirlpool. At the same time, he unlocked the last restriction on the immortal tea tree. Biz Hui, it's time for you to keep your promise. Boom! While the earth was shaking, the remaining disciples of Yushu's sect were shocked to find that the entire tea tree peak suddenly collapsed and completely disappeared. Calm down. Li Hai's face was gloomy, continued to defend the big tactical matrix. If the big tactical matrix is destroyed, everyone will die. Shi Qiu, the elder in charge of the supply of spiritual stones, looked sad, and distributed the few remaining spiritual stones in a daze. He was one of the insiders, but what could he do? If the truth was announced now, it would not help, and it would only make them die faster. Outside the big mountain protecting tactical matrix, the flowing light was overflowing. Tens of thousands of practitioners gathered from the 12 sects crowded the top of the mountain. They joined into 12 offensive tactical matrices to bombard the big mountain protecting tactical matrix, but there was still a considerable part of energy accumulated, ready to be released. The practitioners above Jindan realm of the 12 sects densely occupied the sky of the entire Yushu sect. In the center of everyone, Yen Zai looked at the Yushu sect's big tactical matrix, which had become as thin as a piece of paper. He was silent, as if waiting for something. Suddenly, a flowing light passed through the nothingness. He immediately grabbed it and scanned it with his divine awareness. Then his eyes brightened, and he raised his head and shouted coldly, "Everyone, attack with all your strength." Boom! 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 The 12 offensive tactical matrices lit up with dazzling light almost at the same time. In the horrified eyes of the disciples of Yushu sect, the light converged into a terrifying energy waterfall, and suddenly bombarded the same point of the big mountain protecting tactical matrix. Clatter! The harsh sound resounded through the sky, and many disciples who maintained the tactical matrix vomited blood. They looked up at the big mountain protecting tactical matrix, which was broken with a big hole. The big tactical matrix is broken. Swish! Yen Zai's figure flashed, and the flying sword behind him also flew out, pointing at the main hall of Yushu sect. Capture Li Hai and the holy girl Fong Ling alive. If the ordinary disciples resist, kill them. If they surrender, don't kill them. If they surrender, don't kill them. If they surrender, don't kill them. Rush! The practitioners of the 12 sects rushed to the top of the mountain of Yushu sect like a flood, and there were sounds of killing. For a time, blood flowed like a river. In the face of the elites of the 12 sects, the battle of Yushu sect was simply a one-sided massacre. All the disciples of Yushu sect were desperate. I surrender. Someone dropped the flying sword in his hand and held his head with both hands. After seeing this, the coalition of the 12 sects only stunned rather than killed him, and then continued to kill the next disciple of Yushu sect. When others saw this, they immediately had hope and surrendered one after another. I'm just an elder responsible for the supply of spiritual stones. I surrender. When Shi Qiu saw Yen Zai coming with people, he immediately held his head with both hands in panic and shouted in embarrassment. Yen Zai raised his eyebrows and knocked Shi Qiu out with the back of the sword. Then the flying sword turned and suddenly attacked another long-faced elder. Wait! I surrender, too! As soon as the long-faced elder spoke, the flying sword pierced through his chest and brought out a yuanying. Why? The long-faced elder vomited blood, and the light in his eyes quickly dimmed. Yen Zai summoned the flying sword expressionlessly, and sarcasm flashed in his eyes. Not everyone can get Mr. Li's special pardon. The sun set and the moon rose. 6 hours passed in a blink of an eye. The cold moonlight shone on the blood-red mountain gate, which looked a little gloomy and terrifying. Cough, cough. Li Hai coughed up 2 mouthfuls of blood and sat on the ground powerlessly. His cultivation was sealed, and his injury was serious. He couldn't even stand up. Behind him, there were Fong Ling, Shi Qiu, and others. Their cultivation was also sealed, and they were like fish on the chopping block. Why don't you kill me? He looked up and stared at Yen Zai, who was surrounded by everyone, and asked in a hoarse voice. Was this person the initiator of all this? Unexpectedly, he was not too sad. The new ruler was not bloodthirsty, and almost all ordinary disciples survived. This was the greatest kindness in the war of cultivation. Yen Zai turned his head and did not answer him, but transmitted the sound, Wuxue, how is it? Dongfang Wuxue quickly responded, it's almost over. All the 30,000 ordinary disciples of Yushu's sect have been incorporated. All the elders have been executed except those named by Mr. Li. No one has been missed. Yen Zai smiled and then received a message from Hua Yan, Zihan's sect is also over. Grand Elder Zihan didn't survive 10 moves from Wen Yuanqing of Immortal Cultivation sect, and he didn't cause any obstruction. We are almost at Yushu's sect now. Hearing the 3 words, Wen Yuanqing, Yen Zai's face turned slightly pale. Fortunately, it was dark at night, so he was not found. Mr. Li really dares to accept anyone. No, it's a ghost, this thought flashed through Yen Zai's mind. He put away the distracting thoughts and waved his hand, everyone in the 12 sects, except for those who appease the disciples of Yushu's sect, everyone will accompany me to meet Mr. Li. Speaking of this, he pointed to Li Hai and others on the ground, take these people with you. Mr. Li. Even if she was seriously injured and caught, Fong Ling didn't change at all. Hearing this word, her delicate body suddenly trembled, and she raised her head to try to see Yen Zai's face. But Yen Zai had turned around and no longer looked at her. Traitor, coldness flashed through Yen Zai's eyes. Mr. Li had suffered so many grievances, but this woman could still be a holy girl in the sinful place of Yushu's sect with a clear conscience. If Mr. Li hadn't specifically told him, he would have killed Fong Ling long ago. Let's go. The gathering place is the Holy Girl Hall of Yushu's sect, which is still well preserved. When Yen Zai waved his hand, a group of people rushed to the Holy Girl Hall. Su Yang, who was in front of the team, couldn't help but marvel. The unification of Jouzhou region would happen tonight. Blockhead, Su Jouzhou actually did it. And it only took 10 years. Su Mu glanced at him coldly and didn't speak, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Turning the impossible into the possible. Maybe if they followed her, there would be a glimmer of possibility. Sister, a moment later, everyone stopped outside the Holy Girl Hall and saw that another group of people had arrived. Sister Hua Yan. Yen Zai greeted them, and he couldn't hide the excitement in his eyes. We succeeded. Hua Yan nodded with a smile, and her worried heart was finally relieved. Although the road ahead was still difficult, they had conquered a large region, and they were not without foundation. Go in. Yen Zai responded, waved his hand, and entered the Holy Girl Hall with Hua Yan. The empty hall seemed to be unusually quiet. All the lords of the 33 sects subconsciously lightened their steps, and they were a little nervous. Most of them had not seen the Tmister, and the level of contact they had was limited to Yen Zai and others. Was there a Mr. who unified Jouzhou region male or female? How great was he? They could get a glimpse of him today. In a few steps, in the fluttering gauze curtain, Fong Ling looked anxiously. Finally, a graceful and thin figure appeared in front of them. A female practitioner. It was a female practitioner. Fong Ling was excited. Was it really her? Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Li. We are late. Yen Sai stopped the team, walked to the front, and knelt on one knee. His eyes were full of love and joy. Fortunately, we didn't fail you. Conquer Jojo region. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.